Don't you love that sound? And of course, this is always my favorite part when you start recording and then all of a sudden they let the participants in, like that's the magic. They can't put the participants bringing in before it starts. But anyway, thank you. Where he got day 2 of that 401k National Virtual Conference. My name, I still think, is Ari Rosenbaum, and today I'm wearing the Tampa Bay Lightning retro jersey. They won last night against Boston. I should have won the Rangers, but that's tonight, and I'm kind of superstitious. But anyway, thanks for being a part of this. We're gonna try it. We'll see how it goes. I think when I was a kid, I always liked the McLaughlin Group, but I think today, now as an adult, I like the Bill Maher Show, which I don't even know what the name of it is anymore. To me, it was always politically correct, but I know that that's no longer the case. And we're gonna try to moderate it. We got some people here. Who's participating? We got Mike Webb. I want to introduce Mike because Mike is a big supporter of these events. Always promotes my podcast for the 30 people that listen to it. Well, more than 30, 35. And he's been at a lot of these events. He runs a good video cast. So, Mike, why don't you say hello to the audience? Talk about yourself and how going to that 401k conference changed your life. Well, that's exaggeration.
Well, going to the national one probably did change my life, to be honest with you. The in-person national one that we did.
The first and last national event, because again, it was a great idea at the time, but there was that little thing called COVID, and the funniest part of there's so many. It was a comedy of errors, that whole event. So the event left on Wednesday, ended on Wednesday. By Sunday, the park closed. And we had Goose Gossage as the guest and Ron Duguay. And I saw Goose Gossage at the National Sports Collectors Convention in August. And I think I'll see him in a couple weeks in Jersey. He'll be at the American Dream Mall. And when I saw Goose, I said, Goose, do you remember when you, Larry, who brings in all the athletes, and we closed down Disney World? And he recognized me, and he just had such a laugh. He got up from his seat to take a picture with me. So yeah.
It was
your life. It changed my life too, but how did it change your life?
Well, I mean, it was surreal when because of course we all took the opportunity to go to, at least most of us, I think, took the opportunity to go to Disney. So I'm literally walking through like the Epcot worlds, and the Guess Who of all bands, I think, is playing in the American section. I'm pretty sure they're a Canadian band, but I don't know if there's a Canada section of Epcot. But everybody's kind of like, this is normal, and like, I think there was a little bit longer lines at the restrooms is about the only thing I can notice, and maybe like a couple people with masks. But like, I think like literally 2 days later, Disney was closed and everything was locked down.
Yeah,
I just couldn't believe how we went from like point A to point B just so fast.
Yeah, it's like a bad horror movie. So that's why we're doing these virtual events.
So now we're much better.
Yeah. So
we all survived, so that's great.
Yeah. And you've come to you started. I first started singing in Denver, and you got to all the other events. And tell the people in the audience, because we are going to be in Oakland, Detroit, and hopefully New York City in June. Hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you out there, if you haven't been to one, it is. I mean, it is the. I'm not saying this just because I'm in the present company, but to me, it's like the biggest bargain in the business. I mean, it's routine, I think, even without expenses sometimes to pay high 3-4 figures to go to a conference. You don't pay that here. And you always come away with something. I'll tell you, I've been in this business for 30 plus years. I cannot think there's a single in-person event that I've been to, and virtual for that matter, but a single in-person event that I've been to where I haven't had at least 2 or 3 good takeaways of things I didn't know before. And I like to think I know a decent amount by this point. And for that, I don't pay an arm. The reality is I don't pay an arm and a leg. Plus I go to a venue that's not like a, convention center or a hotel or just, they're always weird places. And the food's usually terrible. You go to a ballpark, you go to a place that's kind of happening and nice anyway, and you can go on a, and you kind of, you kind of, the thing's kind of, you know, it's not 3 days long, which is another great thing. It's just a day. And, you know, you can go on a tour. Usually there's a ballpark tour, and then usually at night there's you can go to the game. You don't have to go to those things, but I certainly am like, wow, this is for all this for, you know, a very small amount of money. It's just the greatest thing. I tell everybody anywhere I go, if they tell me what my choice is, you know, for conferences, you know, I tell them this is usually front and center. So
Yeah, the joke is that I have to get to 30 stadiums. I'm really now at 24, so I got to get to my 30, and I'll get to it sometime next year.
and we got 25 and 26 coming up, or is that?
Yeah, Oakland and Detroit's 25, 26, and we'll see about the others. September, you know, it's September we may do San Diego, we may do Milwaukee. I don't know.
Ooh,
Texas
San
is
Diego.
still, Texas is
San
still in the
Diego.
mix because the problem with Texas, I wanted to announce the date for May, but the problem with Texas is you can't do it the same day as the game. And the one day that I wanted to do it, they had like high school graduation. So I got to figure out if we're doing it this year or next year. But before, you know, this is like a 6-minute commercial for the that 401k conference. Let's bring in the other people. Josh, so many great things about the presentation yesterday. I just think of that such a fantastic tool that you got there with Fiduciary Works. So congratulations on that. And people really enjoyed it. And of course, Bill, you know, it's his fault that we have that 401k conference. So now that's out of the picture. That he was the guy. I saw him in Vegas at the Napa, and we were talking, and then after that, I came up with the idea of that 401k conference. And the funniest part of that thing about the conference was originally I had the idea of doing like a Comic-Con type thing, and Bill's like, that's not gonna work. I'm like, what does that mean or whatever? And so that's why we came up with that 4K conference in New York, City Field, and hopefully one day we'll get back there. And I think James Holland's getting in.
Yes.
James is in. Yeah, you know, it's always a problem with the links with the Zoom. Everybody.
No, it's the problem with James. It's not a problem.
No. It's like, I always have a problem with those Zoom links. Like, you know, you got an event, and I use a Mac, and so you can never get it to link up with the calendar, and then you forget whatever.
James, I know you for a fact you're good at lots of other things, even though Zoom.
Technology is not one, nor will it ever be. You can ask my kids; they'll tell you the same thing, Josh. Yes, thanks.
So James is going to close our event out at 1:30 with his presentation, but let's talk this roundtable. You know, everybody knows my opinions because I'm not afraid to share it. But so let's start out with Secure 2.0. And, you know, to make it orderly, I'll ask, and then, you know, if you ever want to chime in. But Secure 2.0, is this the greatest thing since sliced bread? Probably not. But what do you like about Secure 2.0? What don't you like about it? Josh, I'll start with you. I mean, what provisions do you like about it? What don't you like about it?
Yeah, I mean, I love I think the focus on closing the savings gap. I think, you know, not every firm's going to have the structure, but I think it creates a ton of opportunity. I never worked with startup plans because we just didn't have a structure to do it. But like if I was back in the advisory game again, I think there's a lot of opportunity. You can't do it on a basis point, but if you do it, you know, if you charge a fixed fee, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I love the automatic features. I've always been a huge proponent of that. I think if you look at Pension Protection Act, obviously those things getting greenlit, but I love the fact that this now is going to push a lot of plans. The government's kind of said, like, this is the way to do it. So I'm really, I think I'm excited about that. I think the ability to just help people save more, you know, with catch-ups and stuff like that. I think overall, I don't think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I think the devil will be in the details, but I think it's really, really positive. My one concern is I think it's a lot of the tracking and calculations. Like, I think it's going to put a lot of stress on the industry and a lot of stress on record keepers. I suspect there's going to be a lot of errors that need to be worked through over time. But overall, I would say definite plus for the industry.
What are the features do you think are going to be popular, and what are the features that you don't think is going to be popular? Like, again, I said yesterday, this whole idea that you're going to put, after tax contributions, the employer contributions on after tax. I don't think any employer is going to want to do that when they have a vesting schedule.
Yeah. I agree. I totally agree with you. I think from that perspective, I definitely think the additional savings amounts, I think the automatic features, I think now this gives, and I think it's really going to be up to advisors at the end of the day. And this is no knock against record keepers, but record keepers don't convince clients to do automatic features. When clients do, it's usually because there's a really good advisor providing that leadership and that push. And I think if advisors take up the mantle and have courage, I think that's probably the automatic features are my favorite aspect of everything personally. I think that's going to move the needle the most.
Sure. Bill, what about you? What do you like? What don't you like? What do you
Sure,
think?
there's a bunch I don't like, but I'll start with what I like. As a Mets fan, I always go negative. I like the Sabres match. Turning the Sabres credit into the Sabres match, I think is huge. Making it no longer non-refundable is huge. The complexities of how they're going to get that money to those people is unbelievably, I'd love to see how they pull this off. Somebody who's making $25,000 a year that doesn't have an investment account anywhere else, you're now going to give them, a government match into what? Where is this going to go?
The government giving money away. I mean, the PPP stuff. I mean, how much stuff of that was fraud?
Right, but they don't want to put the money in the people's hands, which would have been the easiest thing to do in form of a tax refund. They want it to go into a retirement account so they don't have access to it, until retirement, unless there's taxes and penalties when they withdraw it anyway. So I'm not a proponent of that. I would have much rather have been more simplistic, put the money in the people's hands. They're being rewarded for contributing to the plan. Now you're taking that reward and locking that up as well, which is good, but it adds so much complexity to how they're going to pull it off. What I don't, so that's my favorite part of the bill is that I echo Josh's comments with the auto enrollment, auto escalation. That's huge. It's been a success beyond what anybody thought when we rolled out auto enrollment, on a widespread scale. So it's definitely going to help people get to where they need to be. The part I don't like is the 403B provision for CITs didn't make it through. Yes, it's in the bill, but there's additional securities legislation that all of a sudden needed to be, carried out. It came up at the last minute. Oh, if we have this, we need additional securities regulation that needs to be drafted. I don't know why that wasn't taken care of up front when this provision was first floated. I think the insurance lobby might be involved to some degree there, but I don't want to go down that road too much because that's just speculation. So that was the biggest miss to me here because it's consumer friendly, it lowers costs, it gives more options to investment committees and advisors in the nonprofit space. The other thing that I think was a miss, and I think this was under section 305 or 315, but it didn't make it through. And again, I don't see any reason why. There's no negative here. Is a lot of nonprofits have a 403B plan going back decades, which was salary deferral only. Over time, they've added a match or whatever, and it's become an ERISA 403B. But going way back, it was a 403B, and then for organizational or employer contributions, they would set up a 401A. So you have nonprofits with a 403B and a 401A, and you can't combine them. Where if it was a 401k and a profit sharing, you just merge them. But in the 403B world, you can't merge anything into a 403B. So, there's hospitals out there, there's museums, nonprofits that have 2 plans, 2 audits, 2 statements, 2 documents. And just by passing some legislation and crafting language that would permit 401As to be merged into 403Bs, you can cut your audit fees, your documents, your filings, your statements in half. So that was something I was hoping would make it through, and unfortunately it didn't. So, some work's still to be done. I just don't know, the legislative appetite for more retirement legislation going forward for a while. But if there's some technical corrections that need to be made, and we know there is around catch-ups, that hopefully one of these provisions can sneak its way through into another bill.
Great. Mike, what about you?
Don't
What
think
do you
that's
like? What-
happening.
What do
Honestly,
you
don't
like?
think
What do you
that's-
don't like?
What?
What do you
whatever.
like? What? Yeah.
I was gonna say to Bill, I don't think that's happening, but
Thanks, Mike.
Why?
anytime soon. I wish, but they
Yeah.
just messed this up. They just messed that CIT thing up so badly. What I do like that hasn't been mentioned, by the way, I agree with all what's been said thus far. But I'll throw a new one in there. I prefer, though it be my preference that RMDs be completely imploded, I like that there's now been two laws in a row that delayed the age. I'm hoping they can get it out to like 90 or so eventually if Congress keeps going. Because
Oh, keep on living. They will.
Which is the average age in Congress nowadays anyway, right? So
exactly, I just keep pushing it back till it's older than them. That's a great point. But the reality of it is that it's funny because I had somebody come to me, like I made a post and they made some comment that, oh, but this is a tax break for the wealthy or whatever. The only people I've ever seen who've gotten caught on minimum distributions are not wealthy people.
No.
The people, had bad tax advice or do their taxes on their own and just forgot that of their 6 retirement accounts, they have, one somewhere. I know we have the different rules for 403B and 401K, and I'm not going to get into that, for the aggregation and non-aggregation and whatnot. But just people forget they have these accounts. And they pay penalties, ridiculous draconian penalties, which, by the way, they now reduced that ridiculous draconian penalty, which was another super thing. Because, like I said, the really wealthy people have good accountants, and they're not missing this stuff. So you're only punishing people who are not wealthy people. So I never understood this whole thing. So I'm really, really glad about that. On the flip side, I really don't want to. Don't get me, in the whole climate change debate. But one of the stupidest things in this law to me is now going backwards on the requirement that we now have one paper annual statement. I mean, I can only assume the paper lobby was involved. I can't even think of a reason. What are we doing? I mean, at best, we're saying the seniors, no, they can't, seniors can't do computers at all. So there's just, there's no way. And we have to send them in statement. Remember, all the electronic rules now allow you to opt out and get paper if you want. So I just don't, it
was
someone explain to me
AARP
on the panel,
Right.
why they have
It was 100% AARP on that paper piece.
But why would they be in favor of it? Are they infantilizing their own members? I'm going to be 55 this year. I like to think everybody I know who's older doesn't, is not screaming for paper. Hey, anybody out there is like, I really wish I could get a paper statement.
Nobody says that anymore. Except, I'm just thinking about the older generation who are no longer working. And, there are some people that just don't like technology. That's how I see it.
Yeah, but they can request, they can opt out of the electronic,
That's true. James, what do you think?
I think it's going to sound like an echoing of everyone else's. I guess the thing that drives me crazy, and I'm sure it's, we can have a whole separate conference on governmental entities and how these things take place, but why not just do everything? Why does it have to be 2023 for this, 2024 for that, 2025? If you're going to make the changes, rip off the Band-Aid, put everything in place. I understand there are technical aspects, the match in the Roth from a record keeping standpoint, good luck with that. I don't know in terms of how that's going to impact them. I think Josh hit a little bit on that. We are always fans of automating. The more we can take the participant and the plan sponsor out of having to do anything with the 401k plan, the better one is going to be. So we're big fans of auto escalation, auto enrollment, anything that takes the human aspect out of it would be better. To Bill's point, it's like Microsoft. There'll probably be a Secure 3.0 at some point when they figure out to get enough votes to, change the CIT approach. I know he didn't want to make it a political conversation, but clearly was. I'm sure the insurance folks who are saying, wait a second, we want to milk this a little bit longer. As far as what they're, I hate to be the cynic, but since there seems to be a panel of them, I might as well go ahead and, jump off that bridge in terms of that aspect. These are, most of the stuff is common sense stuff, which, like Mike said, you can opt out. You don't have to have the paper version of it. You hit the button, or from an R&D standpoint, exactly. They're gonna get their piece at some point. Why don't you let the people decide what it is they're gonna decide, to give it to them. So I think it just those aspects there cause a little bit more headache, but I don't think you can completely remove the whole, government headache aspect of it. So, but a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, when the best thing since sliced bread, I still think that was extra. It put in Roth contributions. It got rid of that stupid rule of deductibility on a K plan where you counted deferrals towards that 15%. For the life of me, caused me a lot of agita when I was working for somebody, and I had to cut back on my deferrals because of the deductibility limits. That was one of the dumbest rules ever. But do you think that, you guys, we all talk about automatic enrollment, and I see, people with the Q&As, and they don't like government mandates and automatic enrollment. Bill Shorey's and I, we had a great friend by the name of Rich Florida, and Rich was the salesperson at Geller. And I remember when the Pension Protection Act came out in 2006. And I was very negative about negative election. I thought it was something out of the Soviet Union when you could force people to defer and you put it into a money market account or it was a money market account in those days. And, because the fiduciary had to get a protection. And when the PPA came out, I'm like, wow, you have this QDIA, and we were producing TPA. And I said to Rich, this is great. I sent out an email to Rich and a whole bunch of other people over there, and Rich is the only one who answered back. And Rich is like, oh, this is terrible. You're going to have people knocking on the door at HR bummed out that they're deferring at 3%. And I didn't see it that way, because I saw that people weren't going to see that in their paycheck. And then, of course, Rich being, Rich was very good at busting my chops. He would go to people around the office and say, if your employer would take out 3%, would you fight about it? And I think that people are employees are very, very passive aggressive. Because I was an employee once too, and I was with a bunch of people that all they did was complain. But do you think, you guys think that this automatic enrollment and all this kind of stuff, is that really automating the process and pushing us all out? And maybe this is kind of conspiracy theory where the government's going to just take over the 401k business?
It's not pushing it out, but I mean, the whole idea is, and we've said it 1,000 times, that the reason people don't join is they have to do something. The reason people don't opt out of these things is they have to do something. I hear about the threats to HR, and I'll give you a perfect example. We have a home healthcare agency client in New York, 3,500 employees, English second language probably to 90% of them. They fought the auto enrollment, auto escalation for years because there was going to be a riot. It's been in place for 3 years now, and the retention rate is like 97%. Why? Because people don't want to bother. They have to do something. Well, you know what? They're annoyed for 2 weeks because of the extra $50, $100, whatever else is out. But after a while, they're like, yeah, you know what? Forget about it, and it goes about, and they can go back to their lives. And it doesn't.
And you're not forcing them to do anything, and because they can opt out if the money comes out and they notice they have 90 days to pull the money back out without penalty. And to James's point, there was a great American philosopher who once said, if it requires effort, it's just not worth doing. And that was Homer. That was Homer Simpson.
Yes.
So,
Exactly.
if that's how you're going to live your life, you do need help. But all joking aside, it's been very successful. And to James's point, when this came out, we thought there was going to be an uproar, and there wasn't, because people realized, hey, I didn't miss that. It came out of my paycheck and it went into my account, and I didn't even notice. Just think back to when they lowered the Social Security withholding tax, a couple of years ago. It went from 6.2 to 4.2 or whatever it was. nobody noticed the extra money in their paychecks or didn't think about it. And then when it went back to 6.2, nobody, blinked at the money that changed in their paycheck. So auto enrolling people, again, if they do notice, if it is a financial hardship, they have recourse. They can say, cut it out. I need that money. So, I think most people have come around to say, hey, this has really moved the needle. And in terms of forcing people, we're not. They just have to do something to get out of the plan rather than do something to get into the plan. And if it requires effort, they're not going to do it.
I mean, the strongest evidence for it is that it works. I mean, I used to have that with clients where they felt like, is this too heavy-handed or people are going to complain? And, the reality is those fears in most cases are uncommon. That's why you saw people start at 3% back in the day. And now they're like, oh, wow, this really worked. And now you're seeing more aggressive defaults, which I think is good, the way that it should be. The other thing too is I used to tell clients, I'm like, look, the people who are going to complain about this, it's going to be a small number of people. And I guarantee you know who they are because they complain about everything else that you do. So but most other people, it's going to be a non-issue. And that's generally what happened. I think anything where we can look at evidence-based and look at that's part of what innovation is, right? I talked about a little bit yesterday, testing hypotheses, see if they work. And when they do, being able to lean into them, I think is a good thing. So.
Yeah, somebody in the audience, does anybody get pushback up with automatic enrollment? And so for a lot of these small businesses, that's a non-starter, and maybe that pushes away people from offering a 401k plan. That somebody you ever run across a plan sponsor that says automatic enrollment? I'd rather not have a plan than offer it.
I think you get it when you run into companies where it's going to be a big spend, right? It's going to hit their, hey, we're at 68%. And if we automatically enroll and it works, and still, I mean, historically, I don't think this changes with Secure Act with existing plans, but you can implement it prospectively or retrospectively or retroactively, which I think is the better way to do. But I think that's the big pushback is cost. But I think Secure Act helps that too. I really like the fact that for these small businesses starting up, that they're going to get credits for the first 3 years to kind of encourage on employee contributions to help soften the blow. But that was the thing that I usually saw was if there was low participation, it's like, hey, this is going to be a 6-figure, 7-figure spend for us, even though I was like, look, if everybody got religion and started participating with your match structure, you're going to pay it anyways. But I think that's generally what I saw was the pushback is, hey, economically, if it works, we can't afford it. We haven't budgeted for it. We don't have the resources. I don't know what everybody else is seeing.
And I think that was to Stephanie's point, was the smaller ones in the smaller plans. That's a big, just to Josh's point. Exactly. I mean, that the spend becomes the issue. So it's not the forcing aspect. It's the end result of it which is absolutely something that has to be taken into consideration when you're looking at it from that less than 10 employee market she mentioned, which I think is a valid point.
And I think though I'd like to think every plan sponsor is a good candidate for all enrollment, I think we can agree that there are some sponsors that it's much more favorable for than others. I mean, I work with a lot of public university plans where the employees are already asked to give 10% of their, not asked, they're told they need to contribute 10%, of their or more of their salary as a mandatory contribution that they can't opt out of. It's kind of tough to auto enroll those people. Yes, they can opt out, but I might see an argument there. Another argument that I've seen that drives me crazy is a lot of clients in the beginning, especially not at the beginning, not so much now, were let's only put it in for our new folks.
Right.
It drove me crazy because I'm like, it just didn't make any, because it's like, oh, let's just test it out on them to see. They're the people we don't want to keep those folks anyways. Let's just test it out on them. But I think over time, I think we've seen that any place they put it in for their new hires eventually just puts it in for their existing force anyway. So.
Right. So let's move away from Secure 2.0. This has always been a tickler for me. We talked about politics, and politics, unfortunately, is a part of retirement plan because we got legislation and whatnot and rules and all that stuff. And one of the things that obviously with Biden being in the White House, aside, from Trump, was the ESG funds and the proposals to allow it. Now, in my opinion, I'm not a big fan of sector funds in a 401k plan, and in my mind, an ESG is merely a sector fund that never meets the benchmarks. What do you guys think about it? Again, my opinion is I think it's a terrible idea. I don't think it goes against what I believe what a fiduciary should do in picking investments. But you guys are in the space and I'm not, so.
Yeah, as you know, for those that don't know, I'm with Invesco, National Sales Manager for DCIO. So coming from the investment side, I'm not opposed to the new language. They softened it up considerably, where it says a committee may consider ESG factors. It doesn't say must, doesn't say can't. And the reason they went that way is because this became a political football. And every other administration was reversing the language from the previous administration. And guarantee if the presidency changes parties next time, if they went with a harder language, they would reverse it, again. So they softened up the language to ensure that this game of volleyball stops, and hopefully it's language that's a good enough compromise for everybody. Now, I agree with the concept of that only pecuniary factors should be factored in, and that word came out of the last version, not this current version, that you only should be looking towards investment results. However, you do have to look at other factors that would benefit the plan participants. If you think that your demographics as an employer, that people would be more likely to participate if there were some ESG focused funds in the plan, then it is in the interest of the participants and the plan to include such factors. If it's going to increase savings rates, if it's going to increase participation. So I like that aspect of it, that you can consider that. Now, that doesn't mean performance is no longer an issue. You still have to look at performance. So if the fund is underperforming, if the expenses are through the roof, if it doesn't make sense from an investment strategy point of view, the fund, whether it's ESG or not, there should be action taken if it violates the terms of the IPS. This is just an additional factor that you can use to make decisions around the plan. So I'm not opposed to it. I don't think it's going to move the needle a ton, but it does give some employers that have an employee base that are focused on ESG some wiggle room. And we're seeing that, in the Northeast and states like Vermont and in the Pacific Northwest, where we're getting feedback from advisors. Hey, this is what my client's asking for.
Yeah, Mike, I'd be interested because I think it has a little more to do with the not-for-profit sector, because for philosophical reasons than it does for the for-profit. So what are you hearing, Mike?
James, I think you've been reading a lot of my posts, which I greatly appreciate.
Guilty.
Greatly appreciate.
Yeah, it's nice to read yourself.
Ari, first of all, Ari, I hear you. I mean, it's like, I don't want the political, I don't want any more than anybody else. I don't want the political wins to create like ESG plans. That's not how I feel about this. But I do feel very strongly that, I started this business in 1991. Almost every one of my 403B plans had an ESG fund in it. I can't think of one that didn't. Back then they called them socially responsible.
Yes.
Okay. By any other name, they're ESG funds. Some of my church plans even had faith-based funds that wouldn't invest in tobacco or whatever. Name your vice. I know there's the Vice Fund. I don't even know if the Vice Fund's still a thing anymore.
It's still a thing. I still get like emails.
Oh, cool. But
you should look at my brokerage account, MGM.
yeah.
I just don't own a Philip Morris Altria or whatever. I'm surprised I don't own that, but yeah.
So, my point is, they've been in those plans for decades. The world has not ended because we had ESG as a choice for participants. Again, we're not mandating anything. As a choice for participants in most 403 plans for decades upon decades. and the world hasn't ended. So I think there's a balance to strike. We're not going to write ESG sections of our investment policy statement because we're still going to be back. We're still going to be back to the fundamental principle. You'll notice whether it's Trump or Biden, the fundamental principles that nobody amended ERISA to say, that, you could ignore performance now, you could ignore benchmarks now, and, you could just go gung-ho on ESG. You still have to say, hey, these funds, maybe because they're ESG, especially on the governance side, because we know government, who wants to be in a business with poor governance, on the governance side, maybe it's helpful, but we still have to, we're not putting ESG in, no one's putting ESG plan in for the sake of ESG. No one was putting in ESG for the sake of ESG in 1991 when I started. They all were looking at it and saying, are these good? At the end of the day, are these good funds? Are we not going to get sued for putting them in? So I think it's a non-issue to me.
And I think that's to Bill's point, the may aspect is the key. As in, if you have a company and your philosophy is X, your employees believe that, well, that's the way they live their lives. So that's the way they're going to invest. They should have it as an option. To Mike's point, you're not going to have a complete lineup of all just ESG funds because it's a choice. You're not forcing anyone into it. I think it's unfortunately when you bring the politics into it nowadays, it's all or nothing. There is no middle ground, and I think this affords a little more middle ground, and hopefully folks will see it that way. Yeah.
I'm just waiting for
defer to-
Cozy Adler to file a lawsuit about how the ESG fund
it doesn't fit into the
underperforms
template yet.
a non-ESG fund, and damned if you do, damned if you don't.
It doesn't fit into the template yet, Josh. As soon as they can squeeze it into
They're
the
waiting
template,
for
then,
Schlichter to write the template, and then they can just
So everyone
copy
to follow
and
it. Yeah. Somebody, I appreciate good snark in the Q&A, and someone said ESG is one reason why God created self-directed programming. So that is my next segue. Crypto
Oh, good Lord.
is crypto account. I mean, listen,
See you guys. Nice.
I invest in Bitcoin, my outside money. I'm about 5% from breaking even. I think my price is like 24, and then I've broken even after going down about 50 something percent. I don't think there's anybody here who thinks this is a great idea. I mean, is the reason it came out is because Fidelity and for us all were planning when this was going at $69,000 a coin, and just because of the regulatory just the time it took to come to the market, and Bitcoin then went down to about $17,000. I mean, is that the reason why? Because I just don't think that this was an idea that was poorly thought out. I mean,
Ari, it's first of all, ERISA states that the plan needs to have what could be considered prudent long-term investments, and crypto at this point
Right.
doesn't meet that definition. Most people can't even agree on what it is. It's not a currency. The IRS doesn't tax it like a currency. It's not a diversifier. It's not a store of value. So we don't know what it is yet. So I would say, it doesn't meet the definition of a prudent long-term investment. As far as why, it got the momentum it did. Look at the tech wreck, pets.com. They was selling, it was a sock puppet commercial, and people couldn't get enough of that. You go back to the case that everybody refers to as the in Holland with the tulip bulbs. So, I'm not saying it's that
as a kid, it was Greg Jeffrey rookies.
Right. Exactly. So I'm not saying it's that extreme, because, there's some very viable technology behind it, and you have institutional money flowing into this. But in terms of it meeting the prudent man standard and being a prudent long-term investment, my answer is not yet. So, 5 years from now, yeah, maybe. But let's see how it plays out until the speculative phase winds its way through and shakes its way out. And we're through the speculation part of it. An internet stock in 1993 might have been the same thing, but by 1999, it was a different story. The bubble burst because we had all that momentum and you shook out the players. But now, you saw who the viable candidates were, and then it would make sense.
Yeah,
This was
as
really
for
just an
Fidelity's-
edge. It
As
was
for
just
Fidelity's involvement, I mean,
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
be realistic. You know,
Yeah,
these are
it's,
800 pounds.
it's somebody point out in the Q&A, you know, the idea that Fidelity's pushing it is we're the record keeper, we're TPA, you know, if you want it, you can have it. But, you know, isn't that really, you know, this person said, isn't that really irresponsible? Because how many plan sponsors understand their role and probably don't understand crypto?
where you're going to see crypto. So, I mean, this was an edge case, right? For Us All, I think, was the first one. And they were really just doing it, in my opinion, from a marketing perspective of like probably getting their lunch eaten by Vestwell and, you know, Betterment and Human Interest and all these
Right.
kind of digital record keepers kind of startup. But then Fidelity getting in and the 20% kind of collar like limit that they had raised it to, because I think For Us All was at 5%. I mean, I think that's kind of what mainstreamed the issue and the deal. I mean, you're just inviting the DOL to come and give you a proctology exam if you put crypto in your plan. And I think the other thing is, I mean, I think it was a money grab personally from Fidelity's perspective and saying, hey, we're gonna get in and do this. I think the interesting thing is most plan sponsors, you're not gonna get like, because of the risk, the plan sponsor probably isn't listening to their employees saying, we want crypto. It's probably a business owner who's like all in on crypto or Bitcoin. That's like, I want this.
People wanted a self-directed brokerage.
Yeah, I want it in my plan. I just think, you know, and this is a whole different discussion, but FTX, and you think about custody issues and the lack of transparency and the lack of recourse. If I was an advisor, I would not work on a plan. I certainly, no compliance department is going to let advisors be fiduciaries to crypto. Fidelity, when a plan sponsor gets sued, they're going to do everything they can to claim they weren't a fiduciary. So really what we're doing is putting, like with crypto, in my opinion, from a fiduciary perspective, you're putting bullets in the chamber, handing it to the plan sponsor and saying, hey, yeah, go ahead, have it. But you're on your own. I just think I think it's a kind of a no-go. I think FTX is going to set back. I'm not, you know, crypto could be, 20 years, 50 years from now, incredible. But I think right now, I think FTX and some of these things have just pushed back the industry probably 3, 5, 10 years. I think it's much ado about nothing. I don't see a whole lot from crypto getting adopted anytime in the foreseeable future. And if I was still an advisor, there's no way I would work on a plan and be a fiduciary. And
what about the wallet issues? Because it could get hacked. And I mean, if a plan is audit eligible, how's the auditor gonna make sure that the money's still there? I mean, we like you pointed out, the FTX disaster. You know,
if you use the 5% collar, I mean, I used to look, let's just say, what's the average account balance? 100 and let's just say 150 grand for, maybe it's 100 grand now. Okay. So 5%, you're looking at $500 to $7,500. If you can't afford to buy crypto outside your retirement plan and invest $500 to $7,500, guess what? You shouldn't probably be in that investment.
Amen,
That type of volatility.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't, and are there any advisors? I mean, I guess we can panel the group later, but we deal with hundreds of advisors.
I've never seen anybody offer it.
And no one is asked, literally. And the plan sponsors, and we have the meetings, it's almost a joke, as in, hey, by the way, I guess we should ask. And then everybody laughs because everyone knows no one's taking responsibility for having that as an option. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we deal with lots of plans. I don't think anybody's ever asked for it.
Yeah, speaking of things lots of people supposedly ask about, what is your take? You know, it's 2 years later. What do you think about PEPs now?
They're the crypto of the administration. There you go. They're the crypto version of the administration. Everything's going to change the world and it's going to save everybody, but nobody's going to do it. Why?
James, don't you know that by 2030, over 50% of plans are going to be PEPs?
Yeah.
Didn't you know that?
Yeah. And exactly. I mean, that's the whole point. Is everyone has the magic wand or this elixir that's going to fix the entire industry. And I mean, what was it 10 years ago, Ari? We talked about open MEPs, and that was the big thing, and everyone was waiting for the DOL to respond. And you know what? People like to do what people like to do.
I mean, I'll get in trouble for saying this, and I've said it before. I will fight to the death about the tag case, and I will I debated with the ERISA attorney who submitted the application, and when I was in college, I was college Republican president, and whatnot. And there's a guy by the name of Morton Blackwell, well known in the conservative circles. And his number one rule in politics: never give a bureaucrat a chance to say no. And the idea that they took that plan, which had $1 billion in assets, unless you know the answer, don't ask the question. And I thought that was whatever. But it's easy for me to say that. But I mean, you guys, we talk about PEPs. I'm involved with PEPs. Is that something that's like succeeding? Because I don't see anybody, nobody, everybody's saying I'm doing a PEP. Nobody says I have $500 million worth of assets in my PEP.
If success is registration of PEPs,
Yeah, well,
raging success.
It's
Utilization,
5 seconds to
I'd say
register
it's
a
an
PEP.
abject failure.
Well, and again, but I think, but it's very specific. So I know Terry Powers down in Florida has been a big proponent, and he's been able to get some traction, and they provide outstanding service, and they dot all the I's and cross all the T's. But to Josh's point, it's a specific market that you're going after, just like anything else. It's not. And to Mike's joke earlier, there's no way half the people are, all of a sudden be like, oh, by the way, I don't want any control over anything, and I'm just gonna change everything we've done for the last 40 years because it seems like the right thing to do.
Well, that's the thing, James. Most small business owners, who are the focus of the PEP marketplace, don't want to give up control of anything. They've worked their entire lives making every decision themselves. And now you say you're going to give up some flexibility and some control, when in reality, everything that a PEP offers, you can do on your own. You can hire a 316, you can hire a 338. R6 or institutional shares are available for startups. So there's no cost savings on the investments. If you want the added services of a PEP, you can get them. So these were touted as the way to lower costs and streamline the industry. And I don't think they've delivered on that. I'm not saying there's not a place for them, there is, but it's a narrow funnel. I don't see the line forming to get into these things, because a lot of small business owners want the flexibility of their own unique plan design to be able to offer their own investments that match what they want to accomplish with their advisor. So I think the trade-offs and the cost savings just don't equate to a huge demand for these things.
Yeah. So, that the feeling is, again, if we go by registration, I think I'm on the top 10 list of most PEPs registered, but so that's not going to pay my bills. But speaking of paying bills, one of my favorite movies of all time is Donnie Brasco. And my favorite scene in the movie Donnie Brasco is, the Godfather and all these other movies, highlighted the mob, like how glorious it was. And in Donnie Brasco, it's more like these are the typical street guys, and they got to make the take for the week. And there was a scene where they take a New York City parking meter, and Bruno Kirby, I think it was smashing it, trying to get the quarters out, or in those days, I think they were dimes. Bill had a great presentation about litigation. Now, do we feel that we've achieved some sort of peak litigation where we're at the end of this because people are now going after BlackRock? I mean, do we have these ERISA attorneys who are just throwing out, lawsuits, just trying to shake down people?
Yeah, I think we're getting close, Ari. If it was a curve, I think we're nearing the top of the cyclone, on that first hill before we start coming down, because you've seen some of the law firms get sanctioned for frivolous lawsuits. Without naming names, it was a 7-figure penalty that they had to come up with. You've seen more and more cases starting to get dismissed. As the flood of these starts clogging up the courts, judges are becoming aware, where before they don't understand ERISA, so they're not going to dismiss things if the claim seems plausible. But now, there's more and more of these. It's escalated in our industry media. So if we're not at the peak, I think we're approaching the peak. Because as I mentioned yesterday, I think it's gotten to the point where these lawsuits are doing more harm than good. And initially they were doing good because they were pointing out bad actors and holding them accountable. But now, we referenced it earlier, with it doesn't fit into the template. You know, these are clearly, the majority of them are cut and paste copycat lawsuits and a money grab for a class action and play the settlement game. Not everyone, but I think we're approaching the peak of this. At least I hope. I hope we are.
My
I'll
only
push back-
counter
I'll
to
push
that
back a little bit.
is-
I'll push back a little bit if I can, Bill.
Yeah.
I will take the roller coaster analogy as in, yes, the templated, the cookie cutter one is, which led to a lot of bad written pleadings, will force those guys out. But I do think there's a wave of ones that will be written based on the process. The problem is everything became an excessive fee lawsuit. Well, it's not an excessive fee lawsuit. Record keeping, yes, that's part of it, but an imprudent selection from an investment perspective is not about excessive cost. It's about a process for which you have no understanding or regard, and too many other people with their hands in the cookie jar from an advisory perspective, getting overpaid from a compensation standpoint, which I think is the next wave. Don't think it will be as big, but I think it will last a little longer than the Schlechterites and the Capozzi cut and paste. Yeah.
I would agree. I would agree with that. I think I definitely could see the slowdown, the peak towards the traditional kind of, I mean, at the end of the day, it's really been about excessive fees and share class selection. I actually think if it dips and then I could see it coming back, more focus on target date funds. I actually think managed
Where the money
accounts
is.
5 or 10 years from now, because so many people are pushing managed accounts now. Like, I just think, you know, I think the chess pieces are going to get shifted around on the board. And I think other areas, we may be peaking from the excessive fee piece, but I think these other areas could really start to pop up. And what's been interesting about a few suits, maybe to James's point, I know the SeaWorld case was an example. You're starting to see not as defendants, but as like named firms. Like you're starting to see advisory firms kind of show up within some of these complaints.
Right.
Yes.
The SeaWorld case was fascinating because I will give credit to whoever the attorney was, the plaintiff's attorney. They went in and they actually named the advisory firm, and they had showed what the advisory firm was charging SeaWorld. And then they went back through 5,500 filings and found other clients of the advisory firm that were comparable in size. And it's like, you're charging one 35 grand a year here, you're charging this one 150K.
And there were two other recent ones, Josh, where the advisor made over $4 million over a 6-year period, and they have other clients that they charge 50 grand for. So again, it's just a matter of, to Bill's point, you know, wringing out the excess, whether it be from an admin standpoint, an advisory compensation standpoint, and again, a lot of it is lazy plan sponsors who literally have never changed an investment in 15 years. All right, well,
And lazy, I would say lazy, I would say lazy advisors that are out there.
and who are milking the system. I think that wave won't be as big, but I think it might last, you know, a few more years. Again, Mike.
What do people think of managed accounts? Sorry, all right, I don't mean to like.
Oh, no.
What's everybody think about managed
we got about
accounts?
7 minutes. Managed accounts. I don't find the need for it. That's just my. I know they've caught on with popularity, but I just think it's just another gimmick. I just like the idea that people just can pick out mutual funds, pick out one target date fund, and be done with it.
Well,
But-
I think it's the search for an alternative to target date funds. You know, any advisor that has a wealth client never just asked, "What's your date of birth?" Okay, that's all the information I need. Here you go. So it's the industry's striving to come up with another solution that's more personalized to the individual. And I don't think that's a bad thing. How they play out, the expenses being charged with record keepers identifying them as a revenue source. You know, hey, we can layer fees on this. We can have a larger allocation to our fixed account in this. You know, it's starting to drift away from its intended purpose, and it's becoming looked at as a revenue generator. I think if that overtakes the true purpose of them, which is to deliver a more personalized solution to the participant, they're going to have a negative connotation. It's very difficult to benchmark because there's 6 of us on the screen here, or 8 of us on the screen here. We could all be the same age, all make the same income, but if it's a true managed account, we would have 8 different allocations. And how do you measure performance against that? So there's some complexities to it. I think as fee compression comes to managed accounts, which it will, if they continue to gain in popularity, the fees will come down, hopefully, and they'll be, getting closer to their intended purpose. If the fee, side takes control and we see this more as a revenue generator for the providers, then yeah, then they're gonna, I don't see them, lasting, and they'll be the subject of litigation.
Mike, how do you see managing? So I'm the fiduciary to the plan. Now I want to put in, I mean, we saw this out there. I probably shouldn't name them, so I won't, but we saw this with, there's a lawsuit going on around, I guess this is more target date related, but moving assets to kind of potentially seed a target date series of a advisory firm. How do you see Mike managing the conflicts potentially around compensation? If I'm the advisor to the plan and I'm a fiduciary and I want to put in my own managed account, like is a cop ever going to give themselves a speeding ticket? How do you see navigating those complexities?
Was that directed to me?
Yes. Sorry.
Because we don't do a lot of magic accounts stuff, so I'm kind of a little lost. But I think you were just kind of hit on the head already in the discussion we've had. Magic accounts are, from me and presumably from our firm's perspective, we would, if you're using magic accounts to create wealth, I have no issue with them. Using magic accounts to monetize participants, then I have an issue with them. I don't think it's rocket science. And it's kind of you can't trust. I think there's a common theme here. I mean, you're not gonna, we're not known for our peps. We're not known for our magic accounts, and there's a reason for that. We don't get into a lot of stuff that could be used for purposes that are outside of creating participant wealth. And that's the bottom line. I mean, did I answer your question a bit okay, Josh, or
Yeah.
am I getting on the wrong stream with it?
No, but I think to Josh's point there is, are they just inventing another way to double dip? Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I think the answer is yes. Because we have the proofs in the pudding. We have to figure out. I think if magic accounts are going to be successful, I think it goes back to we have to figure out a way to be able to demonstrate to plan sponsors it creates wealth. Like auto enrollment was a slam dunk. Who's the most retirement ready people now? People in their late 20s and early 30s. Well, guess what? Those are the people whom auto enrollment's maturing. If we could just show, and I know you can't show it on an individual, these are individual accounts and you can't show it that way. But if all of a sudden I put in managed accounts and 10 years later, the growth of my plan was way higher than it would way higher than it had ever been historically, then I could probably at least say magic accounts probably had a hand in them. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think that goes to Jack's point in the Q&A is, yeah, I mean, there's a better version than the target date fund, but you have to find a way to make it, what is ERISA? Value in excess of cost. So like Mike said, show me that people are making more money.
Show me the money.
Then they're making more money than they're spending, then it's a win. But if you can't, to Josh's point, if you can't quantify it, and what are you benchmarking it to, then you're going to have an issue. Yeah, because you can't explain it.
Yeah, I'm going to have to cut this short because Teresa's going to come on in a minute. But this was a lot of fun, and maybe we should do this as a not a weekly thing, but something.
Something
we could do like I said, a politically incorrect one. It does it with retirement plans, and we could talk, like a monthly thing or whatever. So we'll think about it. We'll definitely do this next year. But anyway. Yeah, I had to cut it short. I got a ship to.
There was a lot of great discussion going on, though. I was enjoying
Yeah,
it.
and yeah, Teresa, you got to be part of it next year. I got to set it up beforehand and invite other people. And Teresa, I always like the Mickey Mouse stuff in the background.
Yeah, my Disneyland office.
I'm a big Disney fan. I have not been back since the national event 2.5 years ago with the COVID and all that stuff. It's the genie thing, the genie
Yeah,
that they're doing at Disney World or whatever. But eventually we'll get our way
we
back.
were there. We were at World in May, and we were in Land in October, and we're going to Land again next month. So
Yeah, I
Yeah.
gotta, there's so many things to do, but like all the
Yep.
complaints and whatever, but eventually I'll get there. But
Yeah.
I wanted to introduce you from SunWest Pensions. You're a big help with our conferences in Vegas, Phoenix, and somewhere else. Where are you, Texas?
I did. Yeah, California. I did LA.
Oh.
I think.
Oh, you did LA. That's it. That's from
I did Dodger, which was great.
Yeah, we're you know, I speak out of school, but Dodger Stadium, we only had that because of Steve Garvey. Steve Garvey negotiated with the Dodgers, got us a great rate. I'd probably love to do that again during the baseball season, but Steve is working with San Diego, so hopefully we'll get a break on the pricing and we'll go to San Diego sometime this year, hopefully. But
Yeah.
anyway, Teresa, take it away.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So Ari asked me today to kind of talk about plan design. He always thinks that's a really good topic for us to talk about. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit and kind of go through some basic design. And I'm also going to talk a little about some of the questions we get regularly. Like we, as TPAs and record, we kind of talk our own language sometimes. And even the guys who were at the roundtable were kind of talking that own language, right? If you put a plan sponsor in there, they may not completely understand everything. So what I wanted to really kind of talk about today was really focusing on maybe a way to make it easier for our plan sponsors to understand and kind of the what I go through with them. I only have 30 minutes, so I'm going to go fairly quickly, but I'm really going to try to bring out some of those differences. So why do we do a plan? Of course, you know, I think you guys all know this, dependable. It's a very fast growing employee benefit, right? It's one of those things, powerful growth from an advisor standpoint, where you get regular contributions going in, additional business opportunities. And if you as an advisor don't do it, somebody else will, right? We see a lot of this in the TPA world, right? Where we actually just had one yesterday where an advisor has been servicing this plan, and now they're going to move the plan to the advisor who does their personal stuff. So, you know, that's happened. So just kind of keep that in mind. And let's just talk really briefly through some of the basics. Again, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. There's a lot of words on this, but, you know, employer contributions, right? Sometimes we call them profit sharing, sometimes we call them non-elective, but employer contributions are also match, whether that's safe harbor, whether that's safe harbor non-elective, whether that's a discretionary match. We'll talk a little more about that. But most of the time, employer contributions can be discretionary. If it's discretionary match, if it's profit sharing or non-elective. But if we have safe harbor, they may not be, or if the plan's top heavy, and I'm going to talk a little more about that. The employer makes regular recurring contributions. The employees will not necessarily know their benefit from the plan will be, right? Not like a DB plan. Again, one of the things when I say DB plan, some clients are like, what is a DB plan? Defined benefit, you know, is what that looks like, where we know what their benefit essentially is going to be. And then deductibility wise, right? This is one of the things we always have to look at. There's a 25% of plan compensation deductibility. You can fund the employer contribution up to that tax filing deadline. And that's one of the things that has changed recently, right? We are still setting up plans now for 2022. Let's say a plan sponsor has a big, you know, tax liability. You know, we may still be able to set up a plan for 2022. Now, we can't do deferrals, right? But we could do profit sharing, and we could maybe even do a defined benefit or cash balance plan. So definitely that's not off the table anymore, and something we really look at. Annual additions up to 100% of compensation or 66,000. So that's my individual limit, right? That I can get 66,000 in. Service and age requirement for entry, right? For the most part, again, something we always talk through a lot with our plan sponsors so that they understand what that looks like. What makes sense from a service standpoint? Age, not so much really anymore, right? But service for sure. Do we want them to work there 3 months, 6 months, right? And even, if they don't, if we say 3 months, we may only have quarterly entry dates. So that means, and I love to use examples with my plan sponsors, that, okay, you hire me today, my 3 months is up at the end of April, but if we have quarterly entry dates, I may not actually join the plan until July 1st. So just some of those things to think about and work through. In-service distributions hardships are allowed and can allow participant loans, right? We don't have to do those things, but this is kind of just a general overview. When we talk about eligibility, right, we talk about the statutory limits. So when I'm talking with the plan sponsor, I always say, the maximum we can do is age 21 and 1 year of service, right? We want to really make sure that they understand that that's the most they can do. And the other thing I like to talk about a little is different eligibility provisions for different sources. Again, we don't use it a lot, but sometimes there is a reason to do that, right? If we're making eligibility easier for deferrals, but we want to make them work there maybe a year before we give them profit sharing, right? So I think one of the other big things that comes up is a lot of times plan sponsors don't understand the difference between eligible and participating employees. So eligible employees are, if you've met the eligibility requirements, you're eligible, right? But if we just have 401k, maybe with safe harbor match, I might be eligible, not contributing, not getting match. So I'm not a participating employee. So there definitely is a difference in that distinction. And I think where that comes into play a lot is especially with larger employers on whether they need an audit. So just something definitely to keep in mind, something we always track, something we always think about. So let's talk a little about deferrals. Of course, deferrals are available pre-tax with Roth. The limits have increased substantially, which is great. 22,500 and 7,500 for catch-up. And they were talking earlier about auto enrollment, and I, in a lot of ways, love auto enrollment. I think it really brings people into the plan. I think, I know that people will participate when they have to opt out. That's something they have to do. It's the same reason they don't opt in, because it's something they have to do, right? So I really do love it. I think our biggest issue with our small employers that we work with a lot is that it's an admin thing, right? That they have to be able to manage that. They have to be able to figure that out from a payroll side and from an administrative side. And that's where mistakes are made. And I think that's really one of the biggest issues with auto enrollment. I'm trying to work this year on some relationships with some payroll providers that, if we wanted to put auto enrollment in, and we're going to need to put auto enrollment into our plans, that has to improve. We have to get that buy-in from the payroll companies. So I think that's where, like I said, mistakes are made, and we do corrections, right? Let's talk a little about the difference between match, whether it's a safe harbor or it's discretionary, right? So safe harbor match, of course, you're required to make a certain level of match, basic match, enhanced match, right? And those limits are there. Remember that it has to be 100% vested. So that to me is always the negative. I can usually talk with a plan sponsor about why that's not such a big negative, right? Forfeitures, when somebody's not vested, and we'll talk a little more about vesting, are usually not that great. And this allows us to satisfy a lot of our compliance testing. So, but plans also can have, of course, discretionary, right? They can have a discretionary match, and they can even have an allocation requirement. So one of the things that we have a lot of confusion on is, okay, so I'm eligible, right, to make deferrals, maybe get a discretionary match, maybe be eligible for profit sharing contribution, but I may not meet the allocation requirements. And when I say that, what that means is that, okay, I've met eligibility, I have that, but a lot of our plans have what we call a last day and 1,000-hour requirement. So if I work there all year, I'm eligible, and I quit on December 15th, if that plan has a last day requirement, I'm not going to share in that profit sharing. And to me, that's something that we typically put in because I think it's an important piece of the puzzle. Plan sponsors hate giving a contribution to somebody who left them last year, right? Sometimes we have to, sometimes we have to do it to beat testing, but by and large, it is definitely something we can do. When we talk about safe harbor as well, we have match, of course, and sometimes I recommend match and sometimes I recommend the non-elective. And recommending the match, I do that, talked with a construction company this week. They, of course, have very low participation, a lot of turnover, things like that. Match works for them. It lets the owners contribute the max. It lets the owners take advantage of the match, and they're only giving matching contributions to people who are making contributions. When we have non-elective, right, usually that means we need to give a 3% of compensation contribution to all eligible employees, whether they defer or not. So again, it depends on what our plan design looks like, and I'm going to talk about that. Sometimes I recommend safe harbor match and sometimes I recommend non-elective. So it just really depends. Profit sharing, of course, I talked a little about that. Some people call it an employer contribution. Some people call it a non-elective contribution. It can be called any number of things. Profit sharing is not necessarily sharing the profits, right? If I make a good profit this year, it doesn't mean I have to make a profit sharing contribution. We really kind of look at two types of allocations. There are others. There's definitely pro rata where everybody gets the same percent. Don't really do much of that. We usually look at one that's integrated with Social Security. So we all know we have that taxable wage base where we don't pay Social Security. You can kind of get an additional hit above that. Again, not something in today's world we use quite as much. We really use cross-tested, which can also be called non-comparable. Oh my gosh, I can't talk today. New comparability, which is where we can really look at benefiting more our highly comp or key employees. We do typically have to give a little bit of a minimum. So I'll talk through that a little bit more a little later. Again, we can have those allocation requirements that last day and that 1,000 hours. And the other thing about profit sharing is it can be subject to the vesting schedule. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the vesting schedules in just a minute. So 401k plans, if we do not use a safe harbor, if we are just a kind of straightforward 401k with or without a discretionary match, we do have to pass the ADP test and the ACP test if we're doing match. So ADP means average deferral percentage. ACP is average contribution percentage, right? We have to run this test where we compare the highly comps to the non-highly comps, and we can't really be more than 2% different, right? And I can't tell you how many times I go into a client who has an existing plan and I go in there and I say, so if you could change one thing about your plan or tell me one thing you don't like about your plan, they will almost always say, we hate that our plan is top heavy. Well, their plan's probably not top heavy. It's probably failing this ADP test. And one of the ways we combat the ADP test is with the safe harbor match, right? If they have deferrals and making a discretionary match, sometimes that safe harbor match doesn't cost them much more and it will allow us to have an automatic pass on this test if we do it right. Sometimes it's cost prohibitive to do that. So it doesn't always work, but it's definitely something we always look at when we're looking at an existing plan. How do we correct a failed test? There are a few ways we can correct it. Most of the time, we make distributions to the highly comps. Again, client I met with this week has an existing plan. They're now safe harbor match because the first year they had the plan, they didn't want to be locked into that. They failed the test and they had to give back to the highly comps basically all the money that they had put into the plan because it didn't pass. They had such low participation. We can always make additional contributions in the form of a QNEC, which is a qualified non-elective, or QMAC, qualified matching. But if we're going to do that, we might as well do one of the safe harbor designs. So just something to keep in mind, something we always look at, talk about, whether it's a new plan or a takeover plan, right? It's important to look at this because a plan will blow up very quickly if we don't pass this test, and the highly comps have to get their money back. Safe harbor, we talked about a little bit already, used to pass the ADP ACP testing usually, and the top heavy test. And remember, there is definitely a difference between those two tests. The ADP test and ACP test current year contributions with using the highly compensated employee definition, whereas a top heavy test actually tests the account balance on the key employee definition. And there is a slight variation between those two, who's a highly comp and who's a key. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So just things to definitely think about there. Safe harbor match we use if participation is predicted to be low. We only match participants who contribute, right? Safe harbor non-elected we'll use if we have a profit sharing and the employer's probably planning on making profit sharing. Sometimes that definitely makes sense. So this is a basic kind of overview, very simple, of 3 employees, 1 owner, what they're deferring, what their contributions are. You can see that a lot of times the non-elective is not really that much more. So definitely something to look at. And we can run projections on those kind of things, and a good TPA should, to make sure we have design right. But this is just kind of a simple example where you can see kind of the differences there. Top heavy. So I talked about top heavy. Again, remember, top heavy tests the account balances, right? Not current year contributions. So a highly comp employee is somebody who's more than a 5% owner and earn more than 150,000. That is an indexed amount. Key employee, somebody who's more than a 5% owner, more than a 1% owner, earn more than 150, and an officer, right? So there are definitely differences. One of the big things, especially when it comes to highly comps, and that when we look at it, the family attribution is always one of those pieces that a plan sponsor often has trouble putting their hands around, right? So I always say it's anybody who's kind of linear, right? It's anybody who's my kids, my parents, somebody who's linear. My cousin works for the company, they're probably not going to be part of that family attribution. So just something definitely to keep in mind there. The other question we get a lot is with trusts. And I always say, well, trusts are always owned by somebody, right? So it's really going back to the people. And that's how we really look at it. So with a top heavy plan, we look at the key employee definition to determine who the key employees are. And then if the account balances of the key employees are more than 60% of the total value of the plan might be top heavy. So what does that mean? That means that they may be required to make what we call a required minimum contribution to the plan, which is usually about 3%, which is the same as a safe harbor non-elective. So just quick story, we had a big law firm this year who, when they came to us, they were like, our plan is top heavy. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, sure it's not failing the ADP test? And they said, no, it's actually top heavy. And it had been top heavy for 3 years and they had done nothing about it because they didn't have good advice. So we helped them correct it. We had to go through VCP. We had to do some other things to help them. But our recommendation now is, well, let's just put in safe harbor non-elective. Like, you're giving your employees this anyway. We might as well automatically pass our ADP test. We might as well do some other things. So those are always things we should look at, talk about, figure out where they're at in design, figure out what they want to accomplish, because that'll help us direct them. So when I said earlier that, plans often come to me and say they're top heavy and they're really failing their ADP test, there still are some plans that are really top heavy, but figuring out what really is, what's important. Let's talk briefly about vesting. Employee and safe harbor contributions are always 100% vested. The deferrals I put into my plan are always 100% vested, right? If we do safe harbor, they're always 100% vested. And vesting is what we call a protected benefit. We can never take that away. So definitely some things to think about. I put two vesting schedules here on the screen, what we call a 3-year cliff, which is during years 1 to 3 of service, they're 0%, 3 or more, they're 100% vested, right? So that means if I leave employment in year 2 and I'm 0% vested, if you give me profit sharing contributions, I don't really take any of those with me. 6-year graded, you know, is a more varied schedule. Yeah, vesting will likely go away with Roth matching be allowed now. Yeah, that's probably true. I think there's definitely more to come about that. So I totally agree with that. Although I probably think we'll probably still keep vesting on profit sharing type contributions, right? I think that's where it'll really come to play still. Distributions, right? Plan document will specify when distributions are available. I've listed some of the ways: termination of employment, retirement, disability, death. Plan termination requires everybody to become 100% vested. The plan may offer in-service withdrawals, hardships, and loans. So those are just some of the ways. Again, something we kind of have standard, but some employers feel very strongly about this. So definitely something we always talk about. Plan documents, I wanted to talk a little about some of the things, right? The plan document spells out the plan provisions. Most of us providers use a pre-approved plan, right? And we use what's called an adoption agreement, where we put in the info. Summary plan description is what we have to give to plan sponsors, right? Discusses the benefits and stuff. Again, do employees really read that? Probably not, but samples, a couple of the notices, right? Safe harbor. If we have a safe harbor plan, we have to give a notice 30 days prior to the start. 4485 is fees and expenses, right? This goes hand in hand with the 48B2 that plan sponsors get, and then the summary annual report. And there are definitely other notices, QDIA, other types of things that we have to give out. So just definitely something always to keep in mind what notice is. So one of the questions I have is, do you count the full balance or the vested balance for top heavy? It's the full balance. It's the actual total account balance. It's not the vested balance. So that definitely does make a difference, and a great question. Hold on, my screen is not going. Okay, there we go. Some of the other things, you know, Form 5500 is required, 7 months following the end of the plan year, 9.5 months with extension, July 31st, September 15th, or October 15th with, if you're a calendar year plan. Auditor's report. Remember, I talked before about eligible versus participating. If we have over 100 eligible, typically we may need an audit. There is what we call a 120 rule, where if we have an existing plan that's always been at 80 participants, we technically have to get to 120 now. But if we have a brand new plan and they have more than 100, that's where that would come into play. Definitely something that's keep an eye on. It's an additional cost. It may make us think about who we're going to make eligible for the plan, right? If a company has a lot of turnover in the first year of service, we might want to put a 1-year service requirement on there so we can avoid the audit. So definitely some things to think about. Again, something we always need to talk about. Summary on your report, that gets distributed to participants after the 5500 is filed. So when we choose a plan, what we talk about a lot is, what do we want to accomplish, right? Are we trying to attract, retain employees, right? Be competitive in our markets? Do we want to provide employees, you know, an incentive to work there? Those kind of things. We have to always talk about cost, right? We have to talk about administration. We have to talk about all these different things. So really having a handle on that employer and what they want to achieve and what they want to do, to me, is of utmost importance, right? Making sure they understand, we're going to use auto enrollment. They have to understand what that means and what their responsibilities are, unless, of course, they're hiring a 316 or something to monitor that for them. But definitely something to keep in mind. I always ask the employer for their objectives, and it's different, right? If it's a small employer versus a large employer. A lot of small employers are like, hey, I'm the owner of this business. I want to really be able to maximize. What's that going to look like? You know, those kind of things. And if we have a bigger group, well, it really might just be having to have a plan, right? To attract and retain employees. So I always say that I love it when it's both those answers, right? When we're really trying to accomplish both. So a couple of the questions I really want to throw out there when I'm talking with a new employer, especially a new plan, I always want to know how much they can spend, right? So if I have a small employer who's looking maybe at doing profit sharing, what are you looking at as far as contributions? So if somebody says to me, I've had advisors come to me and say, oh, they want to put a lot away. Well, is a lot $50,000 or $500,000, right? I need to have an idea of what their budget looks like so I can direct them the way we need to direct them, right? Maybe they need a huge tax deduction. Maybe they are doing really well, right? A lot of realtors recently have made a ton of money because the market's been so hot, right? So they have money they may want to really put away. So and if it's an existing plan, what are they currently spending, right? How much more could we spend? Do they have additional budget to do that? Where do we want to go with that? So what they want to put away to me is always very, very important, particularly when we're looking at safe harbor, whether that's match or non-elective, profit sharing. If we're looking at a cash balance or defined benefit plan, I need to know those things so that I can do the right allocations for them. And then how much do we want to commit to the targeted groups, right? And how much are we willing to commit to non-targeted? So I'm going to go on to my next slide because I want to talk about this a little bit. And this is one of the things I always look at, right? So when we do a new comparability or cross-tested profit sharing plan, right? We kind of look at the eligible employees and we divide them into classes, right? So if we have a small employer, I'm the owner, I have 5 employees, right? I'll be in class 1 and we want to try to give me a larger contribution. And then all my employees will typically be in class 2 and we want to give smaller, right? So if I'm older than most of my employees, that'll often work really well. But again, what does it work really well? How much do we have to give to that other group? And is the employer comfortable with that to make sure that that's really working the way they want it to work? That's why running an illustration is always, you know, such a big conversation is, you know, where are we at with that? What do we want to do? Is the owner of the business, who's the highly comp, right? Probably the plan sponsor, getting the contribution where it makes sense. And I am a firm believer as an employer myself that I'm here for my employees too, right? They need the opportunity to contribute, save for retirement, and I'm okay with giving them some contribution, but I also want to make sure it's a reasonable amount based on what I'm getting. So it's definitely something we always look at, is why looking at having a great census and being able to run some illustrations really works well. So this is a pretty simple, and I apologize, I realized this morning it was not updated for the current limits, but I think you'll still get the sense of what I'm doing here. 2 owners, 50 years old, 5 employees were 30. The owners do the deferrals, catch up, right? We might do the 3% safe harbor non-elective, and then we put an additional cross-tested profit sharing plan. You can see how much more. Now the employees overall are getting 5%. They're getting 3% in safe harbor and usually at least 2% in the profit sharing, right? But it allows us to max out those owners, and both of those owners aren't even at the maximum comp limit, right? One's only at 130,000. So sometimes those can work really well. This is the kind of illustration that really lets us talk it through with the plan sponsor. This is what it could potentially look like. You know, this is what we could do. If we change this, this is what it can do. So having a good TPA and talking through those is always important stuff. I'm going to just see, I think there were a couple questions out here, so let me look at that. If I were selling a leadership team on adopting a 401k, why wouldn't I incorporate in my pitch a proposal to add a one-time irrevocable election made prior to becoming eligible to participate? Does anyone regularly have experience with plans that use that feature? I don't typically use that feature. I think it's sometimes hard to administer, right? And I work with a lot of small employers that need ease. However, I will say that there have been times, like let's say my mom works for the company, right? Or my child works for the company. Especially when you have a child who's younger, they could throw that allocation. I was going to try to go back. They could throw that allocation I showed you on the last screen totally out of whack. So we might do an exclusion of them. But I typically don't use that. I think sometimes those become complicated. So if there's anybody else who has an opinion on that, please feel free to put it in the chat. I just think I just always look at ease for my plan sponsors as much as I can, because most of them are small business. That's the market I'm in. It might be different in a bigger environment, but that's what it is. So just a few things that we come across sometimes, we might have employers who have reluctance to make required contributions. We can leave it flexible, right? We could do discretionary match and see how it works. And sometimes we do that with plans, especially a new plan. We might set them up with just a discretionary match the first year or two, just so they're aware their highly comps might be limited in what they can contribute, just to kind of see what the uptick is and what they're doing and, those kind of things. And we talked about auto enrollment at the roundtable. They were talking about that. And it's true. If you have a lot of auto enrollment and you have a safe harbor match, that can end up costing you a lot of money. So it's definitely some things we need to consider when we're looking at plan design. Costs too much to set up and administer, and it's true. But again, it's one of those costs in my mind of doing business, right? Having a plan, having a good plan. Too many government regulations, of course, we all think that about a very, very thing. So I'll just leave it at that. Benefits to owner are too small right now, but that's where we can look at redesigning a plan and can we do better? And can we really get a maximum contribution in for the owner, right? I always say to business owners, being one myself, that, I view being in my retirement plan and saving for myself as so important, right? Because it has allowed me to have those savings, right? And what if something happens and I can't sell my business when I'm ready to sell it, right? I have that money saved and I've saved that money over time. And then plan termination and other things happening, having a good TPA that you work with, it will help you avoid surprises. And I always tell plan sponsors too, if things change in your business, let us know, right? We can help you work through them. We've had employers, that had 500 employees and, in 2011 went down to 50 employees and vice versa, right? Things are just all over the place and constantly changing. But if there's a change, let us know. And there's so many times, especially like with so many mergers and acquisitions going on, that we don't find out till the end that this is happening. So keeping us in that loop and keeping us know what's going on with the plan will always help the situation for sure. Oh, sorry, I went back that too fast. So here's my contact information. Thank you for the time today. I really appreciate it. I think I answered most of the questions that were in the chat and question answer, Ari. But if anybody has any questions, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out.
Teresa, great as always.
Thank you.
I always say that I see one day where vesting is going to go bye-bye. That Roth thing, I don't know if it's going to catch on, but in my lifetime, I think vesting is going to be fully 100%.
I agree. And I see a lot of plan sponsors now use just fully vesting everything, especially if they have 1 year eligibility or something. I see it more and more often.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look to the the Tax Reform Act of 86, what was it, a 10-year list? It was a 10-year schedule, then it went down to 7, and I think ERISA was originally 20. So I think that's eventually what's going to happen.
Yep, for sure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You got it. Up next, Q3, talk about target date funds and all that kind of stuff. Greg, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Ari. Let me share my screen. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And I can see the screen.
Can you see the screen?
You just have to do that annoying start from slideshow. There you got it.
Okay. Well, Ari, I want to thank you for including us in your in this national conference. I think it's a great time to be talking about retirement plans, because after the way last year went, I think a lot of plan sponsors are a little skittish about investments, but retirement plans, I think they see a little differently. And so they're more open to have the conversation about the benefits of the tax benefits, obviously, and just the retirement planning benefits of their 401k. So it seems like this is a good conversation for people to be having. Topic I'm going to cover is traditional target date funds versus an actively managed solution, and how an actively managed solution might provide you an edge when you're going to prospect plans and also to retain plans. So we're going to talk a little about the history of retirement plans and particularly target date funds, talk about the largest target date fund providers, and then talk about how their performance may not have lived up to the promise of a target date fund, and how an active solution might be a fit for some of your plans. Brief introduction, Q3 Asset Management, we're a registered investment advisor. We're an active money manager. We work through investment advisors as in a solicitor capacity, where we manage the money and we get added to plans. And so our solution is going to be unique compared to what most plans currently offer. This is my compliance department's contribution, that past performance is no guarantee of future results. And this is intended for investment professionals. So how did target date funds come to be, and why is it that they become such an important part of retirement plans? If we look at kind of the history of 401k, if you think about what retirement plans were before 401k, plan sponsors would offer a pension plan. And that pension plan, the plan sponsor would hire a money manager to manage to achieve the target for the employees. And the participants or the employees had no voice in what it was invested in. And the retirement plan was really a burden to the plan sponsor in many ways, because they had to achieve the targets. And then obviously the very first 401k happened about 40 years ago, when Ted Benna, who'd been reading the ERISA rules, realized that there was this opportunity to have a defined contribution plan as opposed to a defined benefit plan. And that was kind of the birth of 401k. And if you think about the way those started to be sold, because it really doesn't seem like that long ago that pension plans were a big part of retirement plans, and today they're such a small part, and 401k has become the thing. But if you think about it, the way 401ks really took over is advisors could go into a plan sponsor and say, you don't have to have the burden of managing to achieve your employee's goal. Why don't you pass the burden on to the employee? We'll replace your pension plan with this 401k plan, and the employees will manage it themselves. Now, in hindsight, you would think we would all have realized that this was going to be a bad idea to try and put the burden on the employees. But what we realize is, for the plan sponsor, it took a big burden off their plate, and that's really why 401ks grew. Then the very first target date funds weren't introduced till 1994. So from 1980 to 1994, the participants were really on their own. And then finally, the advent of target date funds in the early 90s and beyond has started to really capture a lot of that business. And the promise of a target date fund was, we'll do it for you. But I think what we've seen is target date funds don't necessarily achieve what the average participant thinks they're going to achieve. So if you imagine that 401k has really only been around for a little over 40 years, and target date funds have been around for a lot less than that, we can realize that there have been growing pains. And from our perspective, the target date funds promise something but don't necessarily deliver. I'm just going to hit the Dalbar study quickly. Everybody on this call is probably familiar with the Dalbar study. This is the average investors underperform the benchmarks. So for instance, an average equity investor significantly underperforms the S&P 500, and the average bond investor significantly underperforms a bond index. That really shouldn't come as any surprise. We all know that investors tend to get out at the wrong time. They don't necessarily understand the ups and downs of the market. So without somebody to help guide them, they will often make emotional decisions. With that being said, what we need to understand is the vast majority of participants are beginning to move their money to target date funds. So of the 8.9 trillion in DC plans today, 3.5 trillion is in target date funds. And actually, I think that's a low number, but it's a growing number. If you go to an enrollment meeting, and I'm sure everybody's heard the question, you go through the whole presentation, you explain all the investments, and then at the very end, someone raises their hand and says, okay, I heard everything you said. Can you just tell me where to put my money? And most of the time, the answer is going to be, well, if you don't know what to do, just put it in the target date fund. And it's made things a whole lot easier at an enrollment meeting. I don't think the employees always understand what that target date fund is going to do for them. The average expense ratio of a target date fund on Morningstar, and there's 2,562 target date funds, that includes group annuity sub-accounts, is 68 basis points. But surprisingly, 82% of all target date fund assets are being managed by 5 firms. Before I go to the next screen and spoil who those 5 firms are, can you think about who you think the top 5 target date fund providers are that dominate 82% of the assets in target date funds? Now, I was actually surprised by a couple of them, and I was certainly surprised that 5 of them controlled so many of the assets. I'm not asking you to put it in the chat or anything. I'm just asking you to think about it, and I'll bet you could name the top 3, certainly. So number 1 is Vanguard, number 2 is Fidelity, T. Rowe Price is number 3, American Funds is 4, and JP Morgan is the number 5, the 5th largest target date fund provider. Now, certainly none of us is surprised probably by Vanguard or Fidelity. You might be surprised that JP Morgan has so many assets in that space. What I put this slide here to do was kind of to illustrate that while the target date funds are all fairly similar, there are some differences. If you take a look how the most aggressive Vanguard target date or Fidelity target date or even JP Morgan American funds, while Vanguard, Fidelity, and T. Rowe Price all use 90% of their 2070 portfolio as in equities, American Funds is only 84%. And JP Morgan is only 81% in equities. If you look down at the bottom, you can see how those are broken out. Where it shows the number of funds, keep in mind most target date fund providers then invest in their own funds. They'll net out the costs. So typically they're not double dipping on fees, but they are using their own funds. So in the case of Vanguard, they're using 5 Vanguard funds to build the target date models. Fidelity is using 23 Fidelity funds as the underlying holdings for the target dates. T. Rowe Price is using 18 funds and so on. That shouldn't come as any big surprise. It probably is a whole lot easier for them. And if you think about it, it's probably a great way for them to seed a new fund. If Fidelity launches a new fund, they know they can drop it into their target dates and get assets in the fund fairly quickly. I'm not sure that necessarily means it was always the best fund for the client. But I think the point I want to make about the fact that they use their own underlying funds is they're obviously not going to be choosing competitors' funds as the underlying investment, and they're not choosing just individual stocks. They just have the fund managers that manage those funds. So if they happen to have a poorly performing fund, that's just what they have. It's not necessarily an all-star team of funds. It is all American funds is the underlying holding. So the biggest complaint we tend to see regarding target date funds is they don't really protect you on the downside. Certainly in 2008, a lot of target date funds experienced devastating losses when the market crashed. We all witnessed what happened. And for those participants who were thinking they were going to retire in a year, chances are they extended their employment to try and catch back up. Probably took them several years to get back to where they were. And it wasn't just 2008. We know last year experienced the same thing when both equities and bonds took big hits. People who might have been thinking they were ready to retire may have to extend their time. To take a look at what that looks like, here's what those top 5 target date fund providers did in their 2060 fund last year as a max drawdown. Obviously, they probably finished the year in better shape than that, but this might have been where your participants started to jump out thinking they were lost. So you can see several of them underperformed the S&P 500, and that was in the 2060 model, which would be slightly more conservative than the 2070. So clearly, participants who had those accounts were probably thinking that the target date fund didn't really protect them in any way. Oh, I forgot to change this. This is actually the 2030 model. It says 2060 at the top. This is what the 2030 model did over last year. And as you can see, 2030 model didn't really protect them as much as you'd have thought a 2030 model. These are the people who were much closer to retirement and still took significant losses for the year. And we all understand the mathematics of losses. Obviously, a bigger loss takes longer to recover. So if you're down 43%, it's going to take almost 4 years to get back at a 10% annual return. If you're down 40%, it's going to take almost 5.5 years to recover. So whatever you can do to minimize those losses on the downside can make recovery a whole lot less painful. That quote at the bottom, the most important rule of trading is to play great defense, from Paul Tudor Jones. We include that in a lot of our presentations because our founder, Brad Giamo, was on the trading floor and ended up working for Paul Tudor Jones for about 3 years. And that was one of Paul's greatest lessons. He said, when you're on the trading floor, a lot of people think when you're a trader, you're going to be an aggressive person. But as Brad said, it's far from the truth. The traders tend to be the most cautious with money, particularly when that's so much of your responsibility is managing those losses. Another common complaint about target date funds is they're unresponsive to market changes. When a target date fund manager is driving home, he may himself believe the market is going to fall tomorrow. He might be changing his own personal holdings to be more defensive, but the target date fund is fixed based on the perspectives. It's not going to ever go to cash. I mean, it may hold a little bit of cash to cover withdrawals from time to time, but the allocation itself is fixed. It's going to be rebalanced once a year, but there's not a lot of activity inside the fund itself. And it's certainly not making changes based on what's happening in a macro level in the market. So I want to talk about an alternative to a passive target date fund, and that would be an actively managed solution. At Q3, we offer our actively managed target date solution. We review portfolios every week. So we have an alternative to a traditional passive target date fund that is adjusted weekly. We overweight to strength, and we have the ability to reduce exposure to different positions. So if you look there on, this is a typical 2040 portfolio, we can actually, the 2040 portfolio can get up to 50% in cash. We can eliminate all international bonds if we don't think that's the place to be. We can reduce domestic bonds. We can get rid of international equities if we don't think they belong. And something else that distinguishes us from a passive target date fund is we include alternatives in our portfolios, currencies, real estate, smart beta funds, essentially things that may provide some diversification for a portfolio versus just equities and bonds. So if you're trying to understand one of the big differences of having active versus passive, it's really responsiveness. We can be more flexible. We aren't fixed. And since we look at things every week versus once a year rebalancing, we can adjust to changes in the market. Here's kind of an illustration of what that would look like. The target date funds have a traditional glide path initially, and you can see how they're allocated between the equities. We've got active equity, traditional core asset classes, alternatives, and bonds. We use low-cost ETFs as our underlying investment. We're very diverse, as I mentioned, with the alts. We use active management with a tactical overlay to try and mitigate some of the risk. And we sign on as a 338 for our models with the plan sponsor. So we take responsibility for the service we provide as a registered investment advisor. So here's what the glide path looks like passively, but it can get significantly allocated to cash. So it can look completely different than a traditional target date fund when the market falls. Last year, we held a lot more cash. We certainly still were allocated a portion to equities, but our bond position was reduced, our equity position was reduced. And what that resulted in was significantly better performance than those target date funds we were talking about before. Here's an example of how we performed net of all fees relative to those top 5 target date providers. You'll notice that the 1-year performance for our Voyage Target 2050 was down 10.3%, whereas the American funds target date fund 2050 was down 19.2, Fidelity was down 18.6, JP Morgan 18.5, T. Rowe 19.2, and Vanguard 20.5. They didn't really deliver on the promise of protecting the participants. And so then over 3 years and over 5 years, we've outperformed their performance. And those rankings over there to the right, our 2050 would have outperformed every target date fund, every open-ended target date fund on Morningstar for the last 1 year, 3 year, 5 year. Our 2060 also did, our 2070 would for the 1 year. We don't have all the data going back for those other years. 2040 also did. Point being, for some of your plan sponsors, if they've been frustrated, they may want to have somebody watching their account, and that's kind of where we fit. Here's how it plots on the capital market line and versus those very same target date funds, the returns, standard deviation. You're all familiar with the capital market line, I'm sure. Risk across the bottom is standard deviation, and then return. And then the black dot over there is the S&P 500. So that line is essentially a line between T-bills and the S&P 500. And you can see none of them reach that line. If they were really adding value, they should have gotten to the line. Otherwise, the participants might as well have just bought the S&P 500 index and T-bills. We exceeded the line, net of fees, added value for the participants with less risk. Now, risk matters. 7 out of 10 participants would rather invest conservatively, even if it means lower returns, because they don't want risk. Funny thing is, I don't think they always understand risk. They just know it when they live it. And over the last year, they've certainly lived it. And so it may be an opportunity for you when you're talking to your plan sponsors or when you're prospecting new plans to say, we have an option that might improve performance in a way that your passive approaches haven't, and then you can reduce Q3. To summarize kind of the value add of our managed target date funds versus traditional, we're active. We look at things every week versus a passive approach. We use low-cost ETFs. They use proprietary funds as the underlying investment. So we have no incentive to choose any particular ETF. We screen a range of ETFs for cost, performance, Sharpe ratio. We review, as I said, every week. We act as a 338, and we are not limited by prospectus. Our management is very flexible. And now I'm going to take a minute to plug an opportunity where you might be able to work with us right away and get some business under the books in the next 90 days. We're available on a pooled employer plan called the Legend Pooled Employer Plan, or the Legend PEP, Legend 401k. It is a low cost. This isn't the only place we're available. We're available on a variety of open architecture platforms, but I wanted to plug the PEP. It's a low-cost platform. I've looked at a lot of PEPs. I'm pretty sure the Legend PEP is the lowest priced one I've ever seen. They've been around since January of 2020. Reduced risk by outsourcing the investment and administrative fiduciary duties. Most of the plan administrative tasks are managed by the named plan fiduciary, and the named plan fiduciary of this plan is Ari Rosenbaum. So you all know him. And what's one of the big features is it also offers managed accounts. So for those participants who want a core lineup, the core lineup is there. But for those who don't know what they're doing and would like someone to help, our managed accounts are available. For any of you, oh, and most importantly, there are no startup costs for this particular plan. So you can go to a plan sponsor and tell them they can either move into this plan if they've got a small plan that's they're spending a lot of money on, or if it's a startup plan, they can come in here. It's not going to cost them anything to start. It's very low cost. If you'd like to learn more about that, you can email me. My email is going to be on the next page right here, or you can scan that QR code right now. I'll leave it on the screen for a recent webinar that we did with Legend, introducing the PEP to a range of advisors. It's about 20 minutes long, and it'll explain how the PEP works and a marketing secret that they've put together on how to land plan business. You'll get leads, scripts, and sales templates. If you don't want to scan that, if you just want to email me, I can send you the link to that. And with that, I know we're got a couple minutes. I'm available for questions, so let's see what we've got here. I'm not sure if these questions are for us. Let's see.
Yeah, anything after 12:30 is for you.
Got it. Okay, 12:33. I just don't see it as a retention tool that is effective. That's a great point. Target date funds have not really delivered on retaining the business. A lot of participants have been disappointed, and a lot of plan sponsors, I think, have assumed that the target date fund was going to be the solution. We found that if you can demonstrate that somebody is watching their account, a lot of participants like that concept. They like to know that somebody's minimizing risk. Obviously, we were down last year too, but we were down about half what the average target date fund was. I see someone would like a copy of this presentation. I'll make sure anybody who'd like to email me, my email is, I'll put it back on the screen, is GREID@Q3Tactical. And I will send you a copy of this presentation so anybody can use it. Somebody asked, on the 5 years ending 12/31/22, can you confirm results comparisons for other 5-year periods? That's a good point. I can do the same thing. I can get those. I will bet that the truth is, before the pullback, we were probably in the middle of the pack for performance, because when the market's going up, everything's going up, everybody's kind of going up together. The value add for target date, for our managed target date, is really when the market corrects, because everybody else falls and we get defensive. So overweighting to strength and adjusting things every week will keep us probably in the top half. But what really adds value is when the market pulls back. How are large plans that are subject to audit treated? In the pooled employer plan, I presume that's what you're talking about. Once you've, I see the pooled employer plan as a solution as an incubator. Once the plan has exceeded $1 million, I think it outgrows the Legend plan. And I think Ari could probably better answer how the Legend plan handles the audit, because really the Legend plan is really designed for those small plans, fewer than 25 participants.
Yeah, we are not subject to an audit. We have not come close to 1,000 yet, and we don't have a participant employer that's got more than 100. And quite honestly, I don't think that the plan is for us to ever get an audit. Like a lot of PEPs, the idea is if we have one PEP, we're just going to cap it and then maybe start another. Yeah,
that's a great point. And I've always said to the advisors that what this is really designed for is as an incubator, as a solution till they outgrow it. So you can tell your plan sponsor, here's a great place. The solution we've come up with is there's a lot of plans out there, hundreds of thousands of plans that are under $500,000 that are probably paying twice or three times what the Legend plan costs. And the plan sponsors are out there and have no idea that they could take the fiduciary burden off their plate and get managed accounts and low cost investments and not have to do anything pretty much except make sure the payroll's in on time. If you want to learn more about it, email me and we'll send you information about that. Someone asked about having a stable value option in the plan. I assume that's just asking, can you have a stable value option in plans? You can. I didn't build the Legend plan, so I'm not sure what they've got for a stable value component. But you're right, a lot of participants this past year probably moved over to the stable value to get by. And I think I'm out of time, but I appreciate everyone allowing me to participate today. Ari, everything you do is great, and we're looking forward to seeing you when you're here in Detroit. And for those of you who want to learn more about what we can do, please feel free to reach out to me.
Yes, Detroit will be the event on May 3rd, which will be my birthday. It'll be the second time I've actually hosted an event on my birthday. The first time was in Kansas City a few years back. And hopefully the Mets can celebrate my birthday with a win. Go to that 4ksite.com if you want to sign up for that one, as well as Oakland and whatever else we got in our bag for 2023. So Greg, thank you very much.
Thank you.
No problem. Now we got Mike Kirschman from Plan Notice, and quite honestly, you know, being an ERISA attorney and having a big mouth and social media and all that kind of presence, you're always asked to look at things, different products. And, you know, I remember when I was a lowly associate at a certain Long Island law firm, meeting the guys from Brightscope. And when I met them, I'm like, wow, this is a great idea. A lot of times you have bad ideas. People come up with some really awful ideas. There was a guy, again, I like to talk out of school. So a guy kept on busting my chops about this great 5,500 plan prospector that he had. And it was no different than any 5,500 search engine that there is. Like the DOL's 5,500 search thing is, you know, you could find it. Anybody has that. And he was pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And he invited me to speak to actually lunch at his private club in New York City. And I was just, you know, I'm like, okay, so what do you want to do with it? And I said, well, you know, I got an event in New Jersey at the MetLife Stadium. And he's like, oh yeah, that's great. How much is sponsorship? I said, yeah, it's $1,500 to talk, $500 to show up and say hello. And he's like, I can only afford $250. You know, you invited me to your private club to hawk a 5,500 software, and I'm like, and you just only want to pay $250, and I'm like, at a purpose. I'm like, no thanks, it's $500. But the point, the segue is, when Mike showed me Plan Notice, to me this was a no-brainer. Nobody else has thought about it. It's something that I think that a lot of plan providers and a lot of plan sponsors should get behind, because it takes something that is a pain in the rear end with retirement plan administration and finding a solution of it. So Mike, I hope you enjoyed this long-winded recommendation and throwing shade at the guy who's got a 5,500 search engine that whatever. But
well, Ari, look, I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to talk. I will tell you that after watching yesterday, I shortened my presentation just a little bit. So I think I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to stretch at some point, you know, in the meeting. And I know that as the second to last, you know, talk, I think, you know, I know everybody is still engaged, but starting to think about the weekend. So I appreciate everybody being here and the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we do, but really address an issue that I think is an issue that is very prevalent in the retirement plan industry. And we hope to provide a solution for the plans that need a solution. So I wanted to take first an opportunity and just introduce my background a little bit, because many of you have incredible experience inside of the retirement plan industry. I'm fortunate enough to have spent half of my career as a plan sponsor and half of my career in the RIA and and the advisory side. So I have sort of both perspectives. I like to say that, I grew out of the compliance area, having come from a human resource background within my own family business, where in our heyday, we had about 650 employees, and we managed a 401k plan that you looking back on was not managed well. So I've learned from those that background, and sort of why we came up with this. So I wanted to start, if you Google orphaned 401k accounts, you're going to find a ton of different numbers out there. The most conservative one that I found was 24 million orphaned 401k accounts outside within the United States. That number, you can find it from 3 trillion to 5 trillion in assets. But overall, what it is that we know, and all of you who interact with retirement plans are familiar with the fact that we have an enormous amount of people who have left plans and have, in essence, abandoned their assets for many, many different reasons. And if we started the chat right now and said, tell me all the reasons why, someone, has an orphaned account, we could probably spend the full 30 minutes just coming up with the different reasons for it. But the overall issue is that people leave their funds and they forget about them. And when they remember them, they can't find them. And what I found from my background, from my time in plan advisory, most people feel like once they've lost them, they may be gone forever. And that is a concern and should be a concern to plan sponsors. So why do we have missing accounts? There's a lot of reasons, but why do we need to be worried about it? Well, right now, every time you flip on any kind of news broadcast, you see everything related to the shift in the employment side. Last year, we felt, we faced unprecedented low unemployment rates. If you were hiring people, you felt the pain of trying to find good qualified people. You felt the pain of overpaying your top people and to keep them and retaining them. And I guarantee you that's probably happened within both your businesses, but within all of your businesses that you consult or support. I can tell you that's what I saw. Now we're on the other side of that pendulum, and we're starting to see, starting on January 1st, you started to see Amazon and Google and Meta and Microsoft and, starting to announce their layoffs. Well, I believe personally that's the tip of the iceberg. I think we're going to see a major shift from the overpaying of people that we had last year to a correction in the employment world. And the other thing is that I don't think it's just at the top. I think you're going to find it in the mid and in the small levels also, which means that you're going to have a lot of transfer of employee, which creates a lot of ex-employees, which in essence creates an opportunity for missing employees. The second thing is that there's a huge proliferation when it comes to payments that are happening outside in the industry, out in your residential home industry. Along with that, you're starting to see, with interest rates rising, anyone who was not able to lock in interest rates and potentially locked into variable rates are starting to face a different transition related to their homes. I think because of this, you're going to start to see again more movement within personal home addresses, which is going to create another opportunity for people to go missing. Because every time an address changes, it's an opportunity for someone not to update their information and become lost. And then the last piece is that you're going to see a lot of businesses starting to close or consolidate. Just on a small note, I've been meeting with different, business owners, and the hottest term out there right now, or the hottest concept out there, is Chat GPT. You can't go through you can't go through a 30-minute news segment without hearing about it. I believe it's the beginning of a transition from a push in technology to start to reduce workforces and consolidate work by utilizing technology in a new way. All of those things are going to create, again, additional transition and additional change within business. And those changes all create turnover and ex-employees and potential lost employees. So what do we do as advisors to plans? What do we do as you know, as people who want to help all of our potential participants maintain their assets and grow them for their long-term retirement plan? Well, the first is both as advisors, but also as plan sponsors, we need to help everyone stay proactive and persistent. I always like to discuss it in terms of, I have two teenagers, two teenage boys. I have one who, when you walk into his room, it looks like a tornado has gone through it. And every Friday he gets home and his mother tells him it's time to go clean it up. And 3 to 4 hours straight or mother approved. My younger son, 15 years old, he's the guy who cleans up a little bit every day. And he makes sure he brings his, you know, his plates down, and he takes it and he puts out and he gets his laundry in the right spot. And by doing that on Fridays, he doesn't have that 3-hour, you know, responsibility. Well, we have plan sponsors that take, you know, either the Matthew approach, the tornado room, or we have plan sponsors who take the Adam approach, which is the consistent approach. My comment is that, you know, build the habits to stay proactive and persistent. What does that mean? That means we are continually talking to all of our employees about the need to keep their census information up to date. We want to make sure that all of our participants within the plan have access to opportunities to update their information and make it very prevalent for them to be able to, and top of mind for them to make those changes. So staying proactive and persistent helps to keep your data accurate and clean. The second piece of the puzzle is to verify your census. This is something that when I was a plan sponsor, bluntly, we never thought about doing. We always said, well, payroll data is supposed to be accurate. Well, looking back on it, we've all learned probably in plans how inaccurate payroll data is, which is always surprising to me. But when you sit down and think about it, because most employees now, probably 95%, receive their paycheck via direct deposit, it doesn't matter if the address in their payroll system is accurate, because the money still hits the bank. All that matters is if the ACH information is right to make sure the paycheck hits. So what I've seen from best practice plan sponsors is they are reaching out to employees on a regular basis and requiring them to verify their contact information. They're requesting them to either log into the payroll system and validate that the information is correct, or they're sending out some form of communication through payroll that says, you know, this is the information we currently have. Let us know if it changes. The more active you work with your current census data, the plan sponsor works to clean census data, the less risk you have of losing a participant down the road. And then the last piece of the puzzle is to educate. Again, I come from an HR background. You know, all we do is document, educate. That's what you do as a human resource professional. Well, education starts with constant communication about the need to have accurate information from your employees. That accurate information helps to translate into better ability to communicate with them. That's how we don't lose participants. That's how we use the Adam better. We're constantly working on it rather than having to do it up on the back. As part of the process, what we've started to do and where we've developed Plan Notice is that we've developed a communication policy. So I like this to, or I relate this to when I first entered the industry as an advisor which was about 15 years ago, the big debate from in the advisory world at that point was on investment policy statements. It was, do you have one or do you not have one? And the debate always was, well, if you have one, you have to live up to it. So sometimes it's better not to have one. Well, we know how that's evolved over time. Now we all have investment policy statements. We all have 338 fiduciaries who are overseeing that responsibility for our plans, be that either us or an external third party, or the plan sponsor takes that role. But we are documenting in an investment policy statement. Well, I feel that the same thing needs to take place with a communication policy. Plans need to develop an organized, detailed process related to how they will communicate with their participants and by what means, how often, and what they do when they send out communication and that communication goes unanswered. So developing out a true communication policy with multiple steps, utilizing plan committees and the plan sponsor to organize the process of communication, we believe really enhances the accuracy and prevents your issues down the road. As part of the communication policy, we believe plan sponsors need to define when a person is quote unquote missing or when they're lost. One of the interesting things in doing our due diligence related to the Department of Labor best practices regarding missing participants is there is no definition for a missing participant on from a public arena. So plans have the opportunity to define what classifies someone as missing. That definition becomes part of a communication policy. So based on that, a plan could say a person is missing when I receive return mail that was sent to either their email or their home address. Could be one definition. Another definition could be, I believe a person is missing when I've sent out 3 attempts for communication and I've heard no response back. It can be documented whatever way the plan committee feels is best, but defining that creates a litmus test to work by when you're dealing with, your trying to communicate with employees and trying to determine who's missing, if it ever becomes an issue of how do you escalate those missing people. So then the last piece of the puzzle is, now that I've defined my communication process and I've defined what a missing person is, the next step is, how do you find someone? What are the internal processes that you're going to take, and how are you going to document or prove those efforts to find a missing person? So there's a ton of solutions out there. The most relevant is the Department of Labor laid out what your steps should be related to finding someone. The complication is that once you utilize those steps, you have to be able to prove that you're following them and you're following them consistently. So that's a process that, again, requires documentation and part of a consistent process that you've developed and added roles and responsibilities to. So once I've developed a communication policy and I've begun to roll it out, I now have a process in place to handle finding or staying in communication with current participants and avoiding them from becoming missing. And when they become missing, I have a process for finding. Overall, I believe that the key to addressing the missing participant problem is a change in mindset for plan sponsors. I believe that most plan sponsors look at noticing as a chore. It's something you have to do, and it's something that once a year or more often once a year, you get something that you have to distribute. And in most cases, what I find is the plan sponsor at this either says, somebody else, you do it for me. That someone else could be internally human resources, where they just send it out, and they send it out by email, or they send it to a local mail company and have it shipped out to everybody, or they tell the record keeper, send it out. Well, my concern there is that now what we're doing is we're just trying to check a box regarding noticing. However, notices are really important communications that go out to your plan participants. When you send out a summary plan description, or when a plan sponsor sends out a QDIA notice or a safe harbor notice or an amendment to the plan, it really should come with the intent of trying to help the participants understand what's happening and improve their long-term retirement savings. That's the reason we put a 401k plan in place, or any retirement plan, is to help our people retire with the kind of assets they need. So if we change the mentality inside of the company of when we have notice, we really need to embrace that as being communication to our participants. That changes it from being a task where we check the box into a process where we want to fulfill that requirement. The second bullet point is that we should, that plan sponsors should consider requiring validation that the communication is sent. So what does that mean? Well, there are 3 different levels of validation that I've seen utilized. The first is validating that a notice was sent. That means that I have some form of proof that the notice went out. That can be that I sent an email and I have an email list. It can be I sent it by first class mail and I have a mail merge list. It can be that I distributed it and I have a stamped, a stamped seal from the post office that the mail went out. That's a sent validation. The second is you can have a delivered validation. Delivered validation comes from if your email was sent and it didn't bounce back and it was confirmed that it got to the person, or that your mail was sent and tracking number on it, or your mail was sent using United States Postal Service software that shows that it was delivered to a valid address. That all shows validation of delivery. The third step, though, is requiring validation from the participant level that they received it. So what that means is sending out a notice and requiring acknowledgement, either a box check or a confirmation of receipt. That, in our opinion, is the ultimate level of being able to say, I have met my responsibilities because now I have affirmative confirmation that a participant has received the required communication. Now, I can't make everybody read it, but at least I say that it got to them. So as a plan sponsor, it's important to consider which level of validation did they feel comfortable with, and document that again back to a communication strategy, and understand that that is the goal when it comes to distributing communication about the plan. The other thing that validation does in setting the forms of validation is it helps sponsors
I think we have some technical difficulty here, Mike.
that are sent to incorrect place. Yep. Hello?
Are you okay? You're back, I think. There was a pause. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem.
So there's a couple of places where validation can become important and show where information sent to a participant actually got to the right place. And I like to use a couple of examples of areas where when we just go with the normal, I'm going to send no. Uh-oh.
Yeah, you're gone for like a second, but
I was
now you're
gone
back.
for- Now
Yeah.
I'm back? Okay,
Yeah, you're
let's
back.
hope I hold. I'm sorry, everybody. Let's see. So am I still sharing screen or not? No, let's see.
You're not.
Okay, here we go. I'm sorry, everybody.
No problem. That's what the days of Wi-Fi.
Days of Wi-Fi. So basically where I was going was a couple of examples where validation can really help a plan sponsor. The first is that a mistake that typically happens when you just send mail or email is if inside inside of the census file, the email address that's utilized for a participant happens to be a work-based email. What I've found is when someone leaves the company, that work-based email typically gets forwarded to the person who now has taken over their job. If that email address is not updated, but the notice goes to that email address because it's what's inside of the 401k system or the retirement plan system, it's now going to the wrong person. The second area of concern is if the notice goes out by USPS mail, USPS mail forwarding only forwards documentation up to about 6 months from a request of a change of address. So someone moves in January, notice that has to go out is your end of year notices that go out in November. It's very possible that the notices get sent to an old address if that address wasn't updated in the retirement plan system, and it goes to someone else who now lives in the home, and that notice is pitched. So by implementing a validation process, you know it was received. So implementing validation can really create a better system to validate, confirmation or receipt. And then the last one is that when you're changing your mindset, don't just assume that your current program is good enough. I've challenged many plan sponsors to look at their agreements if they're utilizing their record keeper for the distribution of their notices and review that to make sure that the record keeper is doing the notice delivery as per the Department of Labor best practices. And I always like to add to that, if you're going to utilize your record keeping distribution of notices, make sure that A, it's priced correctly, and B, that they're indemnifying you for some of the risk. So that is our challenge in helping to make sure that the notices are happening correctly. So that's the change in mindset. So what we've developed, just as a quick introduction to Plan Notice, is we've developed a system that takes all of these responsibilities away from the sponsor. As Ari alluded to in the beginning, learned over time that sending out notices and communication to employees regarding just sort of the legal requirements of maintaining a plan is something that plan sponsors just hate doing and typically don't have the resources to handle. So what we built at Plan Notice is a solution that takes the responsibility of sending all notices. And what we do is we can marry with any record keeping system and any third-party administrator, and can take responsibility of distributing all of the notices as per the Department of Labor. What we do is when a notice goes out, we send it by email, by text message, and by first class mail. All of those steps work in a stair-stepped process, and we send them until they get validation or verification from an employee. So there's a box in an email that says confirm that you received it. There's a box in the text message to ask for confirmation, and there's a QR code on the first class mail to confirm receipt. If an ex-employee does not confirm, we then follow Department of Labor best practices, and our system automatically skip traces for new address, sends out new emails and emails and messages and first class mail. Then we have a call center that makes outbound phone calls to them with recorded phone calls. We then send out certified mail. We track return receipt of the green card. And if we don't reach them that way, we reach out to them via social media, mainly LinkedIn and Facebook. If we don't reach them through social media, we start the process again, reaching out to their beneficiary. Our entire process is digitally logged, and we create an audit trail for every notice that's sent out. And by doing that, we have proper documentation of all of the Department of Labor requirements. And what we find is that by taking care of that, we solve the problem from the plan sponsor level that A, they don't like sending notices, but B, we do what we mentioned earlier in the slide deck, which is we validate the census information and we stay persistent with all of both the current employees, and we locate the ex-employees as fast as we possibly can so that they don't go years becoming employees. And if anybody's interested in learning more about Plan Notice, my information is right here on the screen. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to take you through a quick demo. It takes about 10 minutes. and we can walk you through how it works and how we can engage with your plan and go over the different pricing options that you can utilize.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Again, I get presented a lot of bad ideas, and I always like to point out the great ones. And I think that Plan Notice is just like one of the great ones because it takes an annoying inconvenience of being a plan provider or a plan sponsor, and Plan Notice, as far as I'm concerned, really delivers. And check out the demo. I certainly did. Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I did see Earl Garvin wants a presentation, so if you want to send it to me, I could send it to him, or you can reach out Earl at michael@plannotice.com. He could give it to you, and send the way for anyone looking for a presentation on that. So thank you. Last but not least, James Holland. I've known, I remember where I was when I first heard from James Holland. I started my practice a couple months. I get a phone call from a certain advisor in North Carolina, and it's only like almost 13 years later.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah. I don't know if it's a JFK moment thing where you remember where you talked to me, but I do appreciate that. And
I don't remember what I had for breakfast, but that I remember. So the important thing to remember.
So, but I appreciate the time. Yeah. Can you see the screen? Hang on.
Yeah, I can.
All right, hang on. Let me go back. Yeah, appreciate the time, everyone. And just to reiterate a couple of things that Ari just said, one of the key things about the conference, which he doesn't take enough credit for, is getting together people who have these either ideas, solutions, programs, whatever you want to call them. Michael's right there. One of the things we're going to talk about today is, why you want to be in the 401k space from a opportunity standpoint, but also from a profitability standpoint. If there are folks out there who are doing jobs that either your plan sponsor clients are supposed to be doing, or they're going to put on you and can be done there, I would strongly encourage folks to take advantage of it. And that's the lost participant thing is a no-brainer to have someone else do for you, especially if they have a system as well designed as Michael's. Josh's program yesterday, again, I know I made a comment right after it was done, but if you're going to be serious about being in the 401k space as an advisor, then the Fiduciary Works one is definitely something you have to talk to give serious consideration to. And from a marketing perspective, Shauna, full disclosure, she handles all of our content and marketing here at Millennium. One of the things that we said a long time ago to the advisors that we do work with is we are all steak and no sizzle here. And the stuff that we had prior to hiring Content 151 was god awful. So we're thankful for that. And just take advantage, reach out to the folks because they have good ideas that they're willing to share. So this is not a knock on Blue Ocean Strategies by any means. But the idea being in the 401k space is your ability to go after different aspects of your business. I don't know how many folks are retirement plan only. Quick background, Millennium Investment and Retirement Advisors is an RIA based in Charlotte, North Carolina. All we do is retirement plans, and all we do is on the plan sponsor level. We don't do any participant education or outcomes. All of our business comes from outside advisors. We handle it from a fiduciary standpoint. So one of the things that we'd like to share with the folks we work with, and I'm not very good with the technology, so this is not an interactive poll, unfortunately, but it does get the point across. And that's when I talk to advisors of why do they want to get into the retirement plan spaces. I don't know 1,000 people that have $1 million of investable assets, but I do know I can help them develop a practice to either find it or, better yet, build it for those people who will have someday $1 million in investable assets. And for some older advisors, maybe that's, not the approach that they have the time and or desire for. But as far as we hear about this, transformation of generational wealth that's taking place, the $34, $35 trillion that's going to change hands over the next decade or so. The idea of going to ask somebody for when they have a lot of money when you first meet them is very difficult, but if you help them achieve that goal, then the conversation becomes very easy about what to do when they have the money. So the 401k place is a great place to start as far as developing those opportunities. We're sticking with our fish metaphor for a little bit longer, if you will. The vast majority of advisors that we work with do more than just the retirement plan, as I mentioned. Some of them maybe delve into benefits or life insurance or disability or estate planning, all of these different things you see here. There's no better place than obviously the 401k. And employers are looking for ways to help offer benefits to employees that will help retain them, but also help them more focused when it comes to work, so they're not stressing about different things. So the opportunity to come in once a month, once every other month, once a quarter, and do some type of seminar. And again, maybe it's, maybe 2 people attend, maybe 100 people attend, I don't know, but the investment from a time perspective to consistently show up at an employer is something that not only the employees appreciate, but the employer appreciates as well. And for those who have been on a few of these with Ari and I before, I'm going to share a story you may have heard. We had an advisor take over a small plan, 35 people, about $4 or $5 million. The advisor had a younger advisor join him, his practice. The kid was probably 22, 23, and his job was to do the education. So he'd go in every quarter and, talk about the plan and things along those lines. And I was there for the first presentation. He got paid a flat fee just for the day. Got done with the presentation and said that I'll see everybody in 3 months. And then someone from the back of the room said, no, you won't. And he's like, wait, he said, people have been saying that for years. Nobody ever comes back. And sure enough, he did. And he came back on a consistent basis. They had about 10 people in the plan. After about 12 months, he had it up to 28 or 29 of the 35. Later that afternoon, he gets a phone call from the wife of the owner. She wants to know if they can get together with him and his partner because they have a little bit of outside money that they would like to talk about. That little bit of outside money was $9.5 million. And he never would have had the opportunity had he not invested the time in the employees so they could see the turnaround from the plan perspective. Again, how do you do that? That leads right into this part here, small little breakfast, lunch seminars on all the things that we talked about, making yourself available off hours. We have a lot of advisors who get involved in manufacturing plants and they have a third shift, and not everybody does, especially nowadays with the work from home and all those different options. The 9 to 5 thing is disappearing. They have to know that, they can get you on an off hour, maybe a couple hours on a Saturday morning or something. The accessibility is what's important. Content, obviously information is available, 24/7, 365 now on all sorts of different options, whether it be social media, regular advertising. Not a huge fan of the TikTok, and that might be my age and some of the god-awful content that I see on there now that passes as investment advice, but that's probably a topic for another day. And just being there, that interaction aspect that they're looking for, someone that they can, a face and a voice and a personality that they can relate to. That's what I understand. There's a lot of automated things and Zoom and Teams and all these things have helped from an efficiency standpoint, but nothing's going to pass, that human interaction that where someone can see that you're emotionally and invested in helping them do that there. The difference between hearing and listening. Again, it seems like a cliche, and you've probably heard it a million times, but the thought of actually listening to what they have to say so that you can then help address what area of concern they have at that moment is going to make a big difference, which not only for the participants that you're talking to, but the stuff gets back to the employers about We have a lot of advisors who are very hands-on. And when I do the annual reviews or I'm having conversations with the business owners or senior management or the retirement plan committee, whatever it may be, there's always the comment of, hey, so-and-so was here again and really did a nice job and took the time. And that's what they're looking for in terms of, that's how you, the true value of what you're providing, and will come back many times over. One of the big aspects that hasn't been as bad lately, but 4 or 5 years ago, this mind concept of people wanting to have complete control over everything. Well, again, this is not something, you can't be a jack of all trades and a master of none when it comes to retirement plans. So bringing in other folks to help out and understanding that a piece of something beats 100% of having nothing. Because if you try to go it alone in this space, you may succeed for a short period of time, but rest assured, it's going to be a short period of time because of technology and complexities, and trying to make it from a profitability standpoint is going to be very, very difficult if you're going to try and wear every possible hat that comes along with working in this 401k space, which leads right into our team sport approach, which we talk about. And no greater example than the host of our conference. For those who do not know, ERISA attorneys are ERISA attorneys for a reason, because ERISA is very difficult. That's why you don't see a generalist pick up and do this type of stuff. But some of them also charge an arm and a leg, and they charge that fee before you finish dialing the phone number. Unlike our host, who is more than gracious with his time and expertise. And, countless times we've had legal questions for either clients and or prospective clients that needed an answer to, and RA has always made himself available to provide that guidance. And trust me, getting a document on legal letterhead that says, hey, this is the way things are working, carries a lot of clout, not just with clients, but prospective clients as well. Recce keepers and TPAs, obviously, from an administrative standpoint, the auditors are very important. The role that you play, again, it's not a one size fits all for the advisor. I have advisors ask me all the time, how do I make this work? Do I need 1,000 plans with a handful of people? Do I need just 1 or 2 big ones? And again, there's no right way or wrong way to go about it, but you can play different roles for different plans. You don't always have to be the same thing. So that small doctor group, that might be a little more time where you're spending time talking to them because the assets are going to be larger, and there's a greater opportunity where, that manufacturing firm, the 80-20 rule applies everywhere in life. The vast majority of people are not looking for an advisor. So maybe you fill more of a consultant role as opposed to doing education less frequently, or just being the quarterback between all the different parties and helping them, ensure that the plan is running the way it should be. So there's a lot of different roles you can play. The 316 component, which again, our host is exceptional at, is an opportunity. A lot of people don't realize that they can outsource a lot of the internal responsibilities of running a retirement plan, which they don't like and are not very good at because they're complex and a good number don't understand them. So do not be afraid to bring in an expert to help answer some of the questions. I know it can be somewhat daunting as you're afraid. When we first started, a lot of the advisors were like, wait a second, why do I want to work with you? You're an RIA. How do I know, you're not going to come after the participants and the assets? And we clearly show them that we gladly, and to this day still do, sign any document that shows we have no interest in participants or plan assets. But we do bring a different level of ERISA experience that a lot of firms cannot. So therefore it helps strengthen the relationship. You just have to, give it a test drive and then realize that, again, the team approach, if everyone stays in their lane, does their job and remains focused, is going to benefit everybody. It's a sticky business. So people ask, why do you get into it? Last study I saw, I'm not sure who it was, but the average time that a plan stays with an advisor is 14.7 years. Okay, so let's put the revenue stream of just that aside. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tells us the average employee tenure is 4.2 years. So again, in the amount of time that you held on to that plan, the turnover from an employee perspective has happened 3 times. Okay, which is just new opportunities for you to speak to about the different things that you do. Plan assets leave at least 10% a year on an annual basis. I know there's obviously some changes with regards to rollovers and how they're handled, and we're not going to get into a compliance discussion there, but the opportunity clearly exists for money when it leaves the plan, as long as it's done obviously in the best interest of the participant. So this is something, again, and fixing this problem from a 401k perspective can lead to other opportunities that we mentioned earlier, that key man, those succession plannings, the folks who take a deeper dive from a planning perspective, that can lead to those opportunities as well. For those who are old enough and understand the Costanza approach in terms of persistency is everything in this business. It is a 5 to 7 touch business. It takes a long time. This is not sitting down at a kitchen table, smiling and signing a document. So you have to be ready. This is a marathon, not a sprint. You have to be able to be consistent, but also persistent. And the persistence annoying line is very difficult to walk. But if you do, it's worthwhile. And again, you developed the branding, which we'll get into in a little bit. But the idea of that persistence in terms of how it lays off another advisor. We do a lot of work with drip campaigns. So we try to tell folks to share content any chance they can. Advisor gets a phone call from a panicked employer, says they haven't done employee education in about a year. He needs to come in and do the education for the employees. Doesn't recognize the name. So he tells this is the president of the company who called, and he said, I don't recognize your name as a client, and found out in fact that they weren't. Explained to the president that they weren't a client. He then explained that the human resource person had quit. There was a file on the desk with the advisor's name with all the content he had provided. So as of today, he was officially the advisor and needed to set up the education. And again, it's not a thing that happens all of the time, but it certainly doesn't happen any of the time if you're not doing things consistently. Messaging is very important. We are in an incredibly competitive environment. The people that you are speaking to are getting calls constantly and frequently. So I don't care if you're dialing for dollars, doing a drip campaign, meetings, social media, marketing, webinar, the message has to be consistent. Your competition is changing their message every chance they get to try and find a way to get into the employer. Yours has to be the same. Whatever it is, you can develop it. Again, ours obviously focuses on a fiduciary standpoint and the experience and expertise that we can bring along with our advisor partners. But the more consistent you are with the message, the greater chance you have of winning the business down the road, because they're not worried about a new mobile app or a website or this or that. They want to know that what you do is what you specialize in, whether it's you and or the team that you're bringing with you, and it's consistent in what you're telling them you can provide as services and or protections, not just for them, but from their employees as well. So you can change the formats in which you're sending the message, which of course we encourage you to do, because we know one is going to work better than the other. It's going to be a mixed bag. But the message itself needs to be consistent, because that is what is going to set you apart from the competition that you're up against. A couple of last notes, if we can. One of the things, I know I kind of went through that pretty quick. Happy to address any questions, but one of the things that I want to make clear to folks here, at least, again, this is our perspective, and that and $2.75 will get you right on the subway. I think still, Ari, it's been a while since I've been up that way, but I'm pretty sure it's right around there.
I think it is. I haven't been on a subway in 2.5 years. I'll ask my wife. She travels twice a week. I think it's 275.
I think
Actually,
it's
no, it is 275. My daughter went to Hadestown last
There you
night,
go.
and it was
There you go.
275 because I had to buy the ticket for her. That's the only way.
So that but the value you're bringing, we hear this question all the time from advisors, is what you do for a living. It's not the platform you bring. It is not the investments you choose. I know a lot of folks say, hey, I'm afraid to outsource because then, if I don't tell them the fund lineup, what value am I bringing? It's a myth. The fund lineup has no value. Nobody appreciates it. There's never been an advisor, and I've made this offer on all of Ari's and the webinars we've done together. And if one of them can say, hey, I got a phone call that said, I can't thank you enough for the fund lineup you put in, it's, made my retirement, then, we'll go to a nice restaurant and dinner's on me. It's just not, while it's important because it's where their money is, I get it. It's not the value that you're bringing. The value that you're bringing is the diversification of the services and the protection that you're providing, not just the employer, but the employees and their outcomes. Yes, that's an engine to it. But if that's your main focus, you're not going to win a lot of business because you're not good at it and nobody's good at it. And that's that's one of the biggest myths that drives me crazy in this industry is, how people think they win business from a fund liner perspective. It just does not happen. The quality of the team and the hands-on service and this, the other piece is the robos are never taking over the 401k space. The technology people, and good luck to all of them. And yes, they have a fit, like we discussed on the panel, from a segment of the market. Yes, there's going to be, but the human interaction and the ability to go see someone and talk to them and explain to them the complexities of running a retirement plan are never going to be done by any type of software, AI, chat, GPT, or whatever that thing is. Again, I'm not a technology person. None of it is going to replace the ability to sit down across the table and have a conversation. So focus on yourselves, make the investment in these different people you've met here today over the last 2 days, and take the time. And if you give it, and one of the things also is, like I mentioned, this is a marathon. If you're going to give this a try, you got to give it 12 months of a try. You don't have to spend your whole time doing it. And that's one of the things also from an advisory perspective, for some of you, if you're just getting started in the qualified plan space, it's not a revenue generator and you have to pay the bills. And I get that, but whether it's 2 hours a week, 10 hours a week, 15 hours a month, whatever it is, reach out to a team of professionals that can help you most effectively use that time frame, and that's how you're going to win in this business. And again, it's a great space to be in with all the changes taking place. We talked a little bit about regulation and litigation. There's always an opportunity to help out as long as you can look at it from a big picture perspective. So I know I'm the last thing between everyone and the virtual bar here on Friday, and I'm sure it's getting close to happy hour somewhere for some of our participants. So I appreciate the time. Ari, thanks again. Happy to answer any questions or anything along those lines.
Yeah. Do you have a PEP?
Yeah, Ari has a bunch of them. Yeah, so we have.
No. Do you have a PEP?
Oh, no. Yeah, so we do the 338 work. We leave the heavy lifting to Ari and the crazy people who are willing to invest the time doing it. So if anyone is looking for a PEP, reach out to Ari, and we're happy to step in our role, but not from a put it together and run it standpoint. We leave that to the much smarter folks.
Yeah, I mean, some of they're more successful PEPs than others, but when you get,
But to Bill's
I better
point
not
earlier,
say anything,
yeah.
but
to Bill's
some of-
point earlier, if you're looking for a PEP, I'm sure we have an individual plan that will give you everything you're looking for there.
exactly, yeah, per the roundtable, yeah.
Yes, for the same cost, same level of fiduciary protection and all that good stuff. So while they fit certain areas, it's not the end all be all.
Perfect. So that's it. I appreciate James and all that you've done. And for our audience, again, we're gonna I like this virtual 2-day thing, and
Oh, it's great. Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna do it in January again, next January. I always loved it. I always think of the time we did a virtual event like right after COVID started. We had like 300 people
Yes.
sometime in like April, whatever. It was like fascinating. And of course, the more you have it, the less people you get. But we'll do it again next year. And of course, we will be live and in person in Oakland, California, Detroit, hopefully New York City in June, and somewhere in September. I don't know, Milwaukee, Texas. We'll see. San Diego. We'll see what happens. Go to that 401ksite.com for further information on all the events. And if you want presentations, I'm sure I could probably get it for you. Just send it to Ari at therosenbaumlawfirm.com, and that's ARY at therosenbaumlawfirm.com. And so thank you again. Take care. Have a great weekend. And yeah, the happy hour somewhere. Take care.
You got it. Thanks, Ari.